Hey friends, welcome to Haunted Bedtime. Before we get started, just a quick note. There are only a few ads during the first 15 minutes, and after that, it's completely ad-free. Just you and me. If you enjoy the calm vibes here, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if it genuinely feels right to you. And I'd really love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Share it in the comments. It's always amazing to see how this little community connects people all around the world. I live in a town called Mariba in Queensland, Australia. It's not a huge place, but it's not tiny either. Hot days, quiet nights, a lot of normal life. If you saw my house from the outside, you'd never guess there was anything strange about it. For most of my life, I wouldn't have guessed it either. This started a few years ago when I was in grade 9 and 10, around 14 or 15 years old. Back then, I didn't think much about ghosts. I'd hear stories and watch horror movies like everyone else, but I never truly believed something could stand next to my bed in the dark and make the room feel completely different just by being there. Then he showed up. I call him he, because from the beginning, I just knew. I never saw a face clearly, never heard a voice, never felt a hand actually touch my skin. But every time his presence came into my room, it felt male. Not just in my imagination, not like when you guess a voice on the phone and hope you're right. It was more like a quiet certainty somewhere deep inside me. I just knew he was a man. The first times it happened, it was always when the lights were off and I was trying to sleep. Some nights I would be lying there on my side, half awake, thinking about school or friends or nothing at all, when the air in my room would change. It's hard to explain. The temperature didn't always drop and nothing moved, but the space around me felt occupied. It felt like someone else was standing there in the dark, watching me. I wouldn't look at him. I don't even know why. Maybe I was scared of what I might actually see. Maybe part of me thought that if I didn't look directly, then it wasn't really happening. But I would lie there very still, my heart beating faster, and I would know that he was in the room. Other times I'd already fallen into a deep sleep and then half wake suddenly, like something had nudged me awake from inside the dream. I'd open my eyes a little and feel that same presence right beside the bed. Again, it felt male, tall, quiet. I would reach out quickly, switch on my bedside lamp, and just like that, he would be gone. The room would look normal. Same walls, same furniture, nothing out of place, but a part of that presence would still seem to cling to the air for a few seconds, like a scent that lingers after someone leaves a room. It didn't happen every night. It came and went. Some months, he would appear a few nights in a row, then disappear for 2, 3, sometimes 6 months. Just enough time for me to relax and convince myself I'd imagined it all. I'd go back to thinking it was just my mind playing tricks on me in the dark. I'd get used to sleeping normally again. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, that feeling would be back. I'd be lying in bed, eyes closed, and I would know he was standing there again. On at least 2 occasions before everything else happened, it went further than just a presence beside the bed. Both times, I remember waking up because I felt the mattress sink on the other side. You know that feeling when someone sits down or climbs into bed, the way the mattress dips and your body shifts slightly toward them? It was exactly like that. The opposite side of the bed fell under a human weight. My first instinct both times was to freeze. It felt so real, so normal, like a person had just climbed in next to me. But the terror hit almost instantly. I knew I hadn't invited anyone into my room. I knew all the doors were closed. I knew nobody should be there. My chest would tighten, and it would become hard to breathe. Not because he was crushing me or anything like that, but because panic was rising fast, like my lungs suddenly forgot how to work properly. I could feel him lying there, just on the edge of my awareness, stretched out on the other side of the bed, close but not touching me. I never felt a hand grab me or a body pinning me down. It wasn't like an attack, more like a very quiet intrusion. He was there, sharing the bed with me like it was the most normal thing in the world. Both times, even though I was scared, Part of me stayed strangely calm. I moved slowly toward my bedside lamp, expecting at any moment to feel fingers grip my wrist or pressure holding me back. But he never stopped me. He never tried to keep the room dark. I would reach up, flick the switch, and the second the light came on, he was gone. Just an empty bed, white sheets, a pillow, nothing else. The mattress would level out as if nobody had ever been lying there at all. Even so, my mind and my body knew that something had been there. Then, all of a sudden, the visit stopped. Around 2011, my cousin was killed in a traffic accident. It was a horrible time for my family. Everything felt heavy and unreal. We were all trying to cope in our own ways. Not long after that, I realized I hadn't felt his presence in a while. No shadow at the side of my bed, no mattress dipping, no one watching me in the dark. Weeks passed, then months. I got used to sleeping without that half expectation that something might be at my bedside. Life went on. I thought maybe whatever had been happening had finished, like that chapter of my life had closed itself quietly. Then, in January 2014, something new started. The first night I noticed it, I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep. It wasn't that late yet, but I couldn't switch my mind off. I rolled over, shifted my pillow, stared into the darkness, and then I became aware of it, the feeling. Not his feeling. Something else. This time it wasn't that quiet, heavy watching presence I had gotten used to. This felt sharp, wrong, like a cold blade sliding silently into the room. I remember lying still, staring up, when I realized there was something above me. Not beside the bed, above it. It felt like a dark cloaked figure was hovering over me, leaning down from the ceiling. I couldn't see it clearly, like I might see a person standing by the door in dim light, but I knew exactly where it was. It was hanging there, just over my body, watching me in a way that felt nothing like him. The feeling it gave off was bad. Not a simple, I'm scared of the dark kind of fear, but a deeper sense that this thing did not have good intentions. Every part of me tightened with instinct. I didn't want to wait and see what it would do. I didn't want to test whether it would move closer. I turned on the lamp as fast as I could. Click. Light filled the room. The thing was gone. That's what I ended up calling it in my mind. The thing. Not he, not someone, just it. Because whatever was above me that night didn't feel human in any way. It didn't feel curious or protective or neutral. It felt like a shadow wrapped around something cold and unfriendly. Even after the light came on, I could feel a tiny echo of it near the ceiling for a few seconds. A weight pressing down on the air. Then that too faded away, and it was just me again, alone in my room with the lamp burning and my heart beating too fast. The thing didn't come every night, but it came enough times that I started to dread turning out the lights. Some nights I would lie there with my finger resting lightly on the lamp switch, ready to snap it back on the second the room changed. I wouldn't always see a shape, but I would feel that same ugly, cloaked presence, and my body would react before my mind caught up. Heart racing, skin prickling, muscles tensing. On those nights I would flick the lamp on quickly. Every time I did, the presence vanished. I started to notice a pattern. When it was him, I felt unsettled but not attacked. When it was the thing, the fear felt sharper and more instinctive, like every part of me wanted to get it away from me as fast as possible. He stayed gone for a while. The thing showed up on and off, maybe 1 to 3 nights that I clearly remember after that first encounter. The feeling of it was so different from him that I never confused them, at least not emotionally. But when you're lying in the dark and something is in your room, you don't always get time to calmly figure out who's who. You react first and think later. Then came the night of January 29th, 2014. That night, it started the same way. I was in bed, the room dark, and I sensed it again, that cloaked presence above me. I could almost picture it hanging there, pressed to the ceiling or leaning down over my bed, watching me. The feeling it gave off was cold and heavy, like it was pushing down on my chest without actually touching me. I didn't wait. I reached for the lamp and turned it on. Light flooded the room, and just like always, the thing was gone. The air loosened. I could breathe normally again. I didn't see any shadow slipping away, no smoky trail, nothing. Just my room, lit up like any normal night. The walls, the door, my clothes on the chair, the usual mess. Everything looked perfectly ordinary. I was so wired from the fear that I ended up leaving the lamp on. I remember staring at the light for a while, then at my ceiling, then back at the lamp. I told myself, you'll be fine if the light is on. It only comes when it's dark. It sounds like something a child would say to themselves, but in that moment, I needed any reason to feel calmer. Eventually, my eyes grew heavy. Even with the lamp on, sleep always finds a way. I shifted onto my side, pulled the covers up, and drifted off with the room still glowing softly around me. Sometime later, I don't know how long, I woke up again. This time I didn't wake from a nightmare or a noise. I woke because of a familiar and very real feeling. The mattress dipped on the opposite side of the bed. It was exactly like those earlier nights, years before. The weight of another body settling down next to me. The fabric pulling slightly, my own body rolling almost imperceptibly toward the new weight. Half asleep, I didn't react right away. For a second, I just lay there, still drifting between dream and reality, letting whoever it was climb into bed. My mind was foggy. I didn't feel the sharp, stabbing fear that the thing brought. Instead, I felt the same strange mix I used to feel with him. A blend of nervousness and a weird, quiet sense of calm. Almost like being watched by someone who means no harm, but still doesn't belong there. It was only when I became more awake that the details started to register. First, I realized that the lamp was off. That thought hit me like a cold splash of water. I knew I had left the lamp on when I fell asleep. I was sure of it. I remembered my hand leaving the switch and my eyes closing into warm yellow light. I had not turned it off. I hadn't moved from my spot until I felt the bed dip. So who switched the lamp off? That's when the fear started rising fast. Before I could fully process it, the weight beside me shifted. It moved closer, spreading across my body. It felt like someone was lying on top of me, face down, using me as a pillow. Not crushing the air out of my lungs, but pressing enough that there was no mistaking it. There was a body on top of mine. My heart jumped. My breathing became quick and shallow. This wasn't like when he lay beside me before. This was closer, more intimate, like someone you trusted leaning their whole weight across you in a lazy, familiar way. But I didn't know for certain yet if it was him or it. In the dark, with that much weight on me, panic started to drown out everything else. My mind threw up both images at once, his quiet, calm presence and the thing's cold, dark cloak above my bed. My thoughts tangled. I didn't want to believe the thing was this close. I didn't want to believe anything was. Instinct took over. I twisted, rolling my body just enough to free my arm. I reached for the lamp in a single desperate movement, my fingers scrambling over the bedside table until they found the switch. Click. Light. In that instant, the weight vanished. It was as if someone had instantly disappeared mid-breath. 1 second there was pressure, warmth, the feeling of another body stretched across mine. The next second, there was nothing. The mattress rose back up under me. The air around me felt light again. Empty, harmless. The bed was just a bed. I was alone in my room. I lay there, breathing hard, staring at the place where the weight had been, my mind racing to sort out what had just happened. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. And then something else hit me. The presence that had been on top of me didn't feel like the thing at all. When the thing is in my room, its presence feels wrong. It feels cold and threatening, like it doesn't care about me as a person, just as something it can lean over or press down on. There's this hostility in the air. My body reacts to it instantly with panic and disgust. But the figure in my bed that night didn't feel like that. Even with the fear and the shock, a part of me recognized it. The feeling was strangely familiar. It was the same quiet, steady presence I had known years earlier. The same male feeling. The same unspoken understanding that he would never stop me from turning on the light, never hold me down to hurt me. The more I replayed it in my mind, the more certain I became. It wasn't the thing that climbed into bed with me. It was him. He had turned off the lamp somehow. He had climbed onto the mattress beside me and then across me. He had lain there like a partner using my body as a pillow, close but not cruel. He had let me move. Let me reach for the lamp, let me switch it on, and as always, the moment light filled the room, he left. Sitting there under the yellow glow, I didn't know how to feel. On one hand, everything about it was terrifying. A presence that can switch off a lamp, lie down on top of you in the dark, and disappear the second you turn on the light. That's not something you can ignore. It's not something you can easily explain away with tiredness or imagination. The physical sensations were too clear to be a simple dream. On the other hand, he has never hurt me, not once. All these years, through all the strange late-night visits and the times the bed dipped beside me, he has never pushed, choked, hit, dragged, or tried to stop me from waking fully. He has never pinned me down with the intent to terrify or harm. The worst fear I feel around him is mostly from the situation itself, because no matter how gentle something feels, it's still not normal to have an invisible man in your room. The thing is different. The thing feels like danger. A cold, cloaked shape that hovers above my bed and makes my skin crawl without touching me. That presence makes my stomach twist with instinctive fear. I want it nowhere near me. Whenever I sense it, my first reaction is always to run for the light. It feels like something that shouldn't be there under any condition. He feels different. He makes me uneasy, but not the same way. Even when I'm scared, there is this strange part of me that wants to trust him, that feels drawn toward him instead of away from him. When he's near, I get the sense that, in his own strange way, he is there for me, not against me. It's confusing and unsettling and somehow comforting all at once. Now I'm stuck in this strange place where both of them exist in my mind, the dark cloaked thing that feels wrong and the quiet male presence I call him. The problem is, in the dark, I can't always tell who is there first. If I feel something close to my bed, my instinct is to panic and turn on the lamp before I try to calmly identify which one it is. The fear of the thing makes me push him away too. That's what scares me most now. If he continues to make himself known before I can properly register who it is, I'm going to keep reacting the same way. Snapping the lamp on, chasing both presences out of the room without giving myself time to understand. I don't know who he is or why he's been with me all these years. I don't know why he stopped coming after my cousin died and then started again. I don't know why the thing appeared at all or what it wants. I don't know if they're connected in any way or if they are completely separate. I just know this. When the thing is near, I feel wrong all over and I want it gone. When he is near, I am scared, but underneath the fear, some part of me feels safe. And for reasons I can't really explain, that quiet, strange safety is almost more unsettling than the fear itself. I grew up being scared of the dark, in a way that never really made sense to anyone else. It wasn't just a normal childhood fear where you grow out of it after a few bad dreams. It was deeper than that, like something in the dark was paying attention to me, waiting for the moment the lights went out. My mother still has my old baby logbook. On one of the pages, the nurses had written that I wouldn't sleep unless there was a light on and some music playing. I was only a newborn, still in the hospital, and already I needed light. As I got older, that never changed. If the room was too dark, I just couldn't relax. It was like the night itself was watching me. Mom would get fed up sometimes and try to break the habit. She'd say things like, "You're old enough now, you'll be fine," and turn the light off when she left the room. I'd climb into bed, pull the blanket up, and stare into the darkness, trying to convince myself I was safe, but it never felt safe. The second the room went dark, a heavy feeling would settle over everything. The air felt thicker, and I'd get that horrible sense that something was standing in the room with me, just out of sight. It didn't feel like imagination. It felt like being stared at. I would lie there for hours, barely sleeping, listening to every tiny sound, the creaking of the house, the rustle of fabric, the soft hum of something electrical in another room. Sometimes I would hear breathing near my bed. Not the steady, familiar breathing of someone sleeping next to you, but a slow, close sound from just beside me or near my head, as if someone was standing over me and leaning down. I would hold my breath and listen, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The breathing would stop the second I sat up or reached for the light. Other times I would hear my name, not loud, not shouted, just spoken quietly, like someone was trying not to wake anyone else. I'd hear it near my bed or from the doorway, and I'd answer, thinking it was Mom or my brother. But whenever I called out or got up to check, nobody was there. Everyone would be asleep, doors closed, lights off. At first I thought I was just overtired, hearing things because I already felt nervous, but it kept happening. Eventually, I found out I wasn't the only one. My older brother, who is 3 years older than me, later told me he had gone through almost the same thing. He said he'd lie in his room at night and feel like something was there with him, watching. He'd hear breathing, feel that same being stared at feeling, and sometimes even hear his name. It got so bad for him that he changed rooms with Mum for a while and later moved into the rumpus room instead. He never really made a big dramatic scene about it, but he quietly did everything he could to get away from that sensation. Back then, Mum didn't know what was happening to either of us. She never heard anything, never saw anything, and we didn't tell her much when we were smaller. Most of the time, she just thought we were being difficult kids who didn't like sleeping alone. The only thing that really stopped it for me, at least for a while, was the TV. Around 8 or 9 years old, I started sleeping with my television on every night. The soft glow of the screen and the low murmur of late-night shows or static seemed to push that heavy feeling back. When the room wasn't completely dark and silent, I didn't feel like I was being watched as much. Whatever used to breathe near my bed or whisper my name seemed to keep its distance when the TV was on. Slowly, I stopped having those experiences as often. I convinced myself it had all just been my imagination and that I'd finally grown out of it. But that wasn't the end of strange things in my life. Around the same time, there was something that happened at my dad's place. He lived in a beach town near Hobart, and I would go and stay with him on some weekends. The bedroom I used there had bunk beds, but I always slept on the bottom bunk. The bed was pushed right up against the wall so that only one side was open. At the foot of the bed, there was a big tallboy chest of drawers, pressed tight against the bed. On the other side of the tallboy was the window. The opposite wall had built-in cupboards from one end to the other. It's important to picture this, because where the light came from that night makes no sense. One night, I woke up and saw a bright, round circle of light on the side of the tallboy that faced my bed. It looked exactly like the beam of a torch being shown against it, a neat, clear, circular glow. The door to my room was shut. I didn't have a torch. The window behind the tallboy faced the side of the neighboring house, and there was no way a streetlight or a car could have shone that perfectly round light in that exact spot. I lay there frozen, staring at the circle of light. There was no sound, no movement, just that one steady, bright spot shining where there shouldn't have been any light at all. I finally hid under the covers and stayed like that until I fell asleep. I never saw that light again. It only happened that once. Months later, I took a friend down to Dad's with me, and because she was there, I slept on the top bunk for the first and only time. Years after that, when we were older and swapping ghost stories, I finally asked her if anything strange had happened to her in that room. She said yes. She had seen the same kind of light on the tallboy when she stayed in the bottom bunk, bright, round, like a torch beam. She had assumed it was me using a torch, but I hadn't even had one. That stuck with me. The next really strange cluster of events happened when my pop died. It was 2004. I was 14. My grandparents lived downstairs in what we called the granny flat. It was part of our 2-story house. Downstairs was their space, bedroom, bathroom, a little den off the garage. Upstairs was ours, Mum, my brother, and me. Pop spent most of his time in the den, a small room off the garage. He had his desk in there and a fold-out couch where he slept because his snoring kept Nan awake. It was his space, his little retreat. One evening, he passed away in that room, quietly in his sleep. They said it was suspected heart failure. That week, while Mum and Nan were clearing out the den and sorting through his things, odd things kept happening. There was a sturdy wooden shelf on the wall, held up by solid brackets. It had been there for years, loaded with books and ornaments, and had never so much as wobbled. One day, as they were working in the room, the shelf suddenly fell down. Not a small slip or tilt. It came away from the wall and dropped, sending everything crashing to the floor. The brackets were still fixed in the wall. Nothing looked broken or loose. It was as if someone had simply lifted the shelf up and out of the brackets and then let it fall. Outside in the front yard, Pop had a bird feeder hanging from a chain on a tree branch. He loved that thing. He kept it filled and liked watching the birds come and go. It had hung there for years without a problem. That same week, the bird feeder suddenly fell. The chain wasn't broken or rusted through. There were no signs of damage. Nothing snapped. It was just down, on the ground, as if someone had unhooked it. Inside the house, Nan's favorite mantel clock started behaving strangely too. She always kept it tucked back against the wall on the mantelpiece, nice and neat. That week, she kept finding it moved. It would be slid forward to the edge, as if someone had pulled it closer or bumped it from behind. She would put it back against the wall, and later it would be forward again. It was such a small thing, but it unnerved her. We told ourselves it could all be explained. Maybe vibrations, maybe someone accidentally knocked the shelf earlier, maybe the chain on the bird feeder finally slipped or twisted the wrong way. But it was strange that so many sturdy things that had been solid and undisturbed for years, all decided to fall or move in the same week that Pop died. Nan didn't just notice the physical things. At night, when she tried to sleep, she often felt the mattress dip beside her. The way it used to when Pop came to bed. She would be lying there alone and feel the bed sink as if someone had sat down next to her. Sometimes she would turn on the light and see an actual indentation on the blanket, like the shape of someone sitting right there. She said she could feel him, not like a threat, not like something strange, but like him. Like her husband had sat down to be with her, the way he always used to. The cats seemed to notice him too. We had 3 cats, and Pop used to tease them in life by lightly tugging their tails when they walked past his chair. He found their reactions funny. After he died, the cats would suddenly jump or spin around, staring at their own tails with wide eyes as if something had just grabbed them. There'd be no one near them, no one bending down to touch them. Mum would shake her head, half amused, and say, "That's Pop, still tormenting them." In time, life went on, but the house was never completely quiet. Our home was split into 2 levels. Downstairs was the granny flat and garages. Upstairs was the main house, 3 bedrooms, a bathroom, kitchen, and 2 lounge areas. One lounge room ran into the dining and kitchen area, and the doors between them were glass sliding doors. As my brother and I got older, the original lounge room wasn't used much, and Mum set up the dining area as her main sitting room instead. She'd often close the glass doors at night to keep the warmth in. It was around this time that Mum started seeing something. She told us that on some nights, usually around 9 o'clock, she would be sitting in her chair watching TV or reading, and she'd see a head quickly peek around the doorway of the unused lounge. Just a head at normal height, like a person leaning around the corner to look through the glass door for a second before disappearing again. The movement was fast, like a quick check-in, and then it was gone. She would look up and the doorway would be empty. She never saw the full body, only that fast, curious glimpse. She always thought of Pop when it happened, like he was just poking his head around to see if everything was all right. We never actually found out exactly what time he had died downstairs in the den, but she always felt like 9 o'clock became his checking-in time. Years passed. I moved out again, but I often brought my dog over when I visited or when Mum looked after him for me. He's the kind of dog that doesn't bark for no reason. He's protective, but not noisy. If he barks at the door, it's because someone is really there. If a stranger comes down the driveway or knocks, he lets you know. That's his normal behavior. Other than that, he's pretty calm. But in Mum's house, he started acting differently. There were nights when, around 9 again, he would wander to the doorway between the 2 lounge rooms and stand there, staring into the unused room. His body would tense, and he would let out a deep, serious bark. Not a playful sound, a single warning bark. Then he'd pause, look, sweep his eyes across the corner near the floor, and bark again. Always in the same direction, the bottom right corner of that room, as if something small or hunched was standing there. The first time I saw it properly, I called him to me. He ignored me at first, still focused on that exact spot. When I walked over to him, I tried to lead him into the unused lounge room. He would walk with me, but he wouldn't move. He would just stand there, staring into the unused room. His body would tense, and he would let out a deep, serious bark. Not a playful sound, a single warning bark. Then he'd pause, look, sweep his eyes across the corner near the floor, and bark again. Always in the same direction, the bottom right corner of that room, as if something small or hunched was standing there. The first time I saw it properly, I called him to me. He ignored me at first, still focused on that exact spot. When I walked over to him, I tried to lead him into the unused lounge room. But when we got close to that corner, he would veer away sharply, giving an invisible circle a wide berth. He refused to step into a small patch of space right near the wall, as if something was standing there blocking his way. He wasn't growling and lunging like he would at an intruder. It was more wary, like he didn't quite trust whatever he was sensing. I tried to gently pull him into that spot, but he resisted, like I was asking him to walk into a person. It was as if, for him, something solid filled that empty piece of floor. This kept happening. Some nights I wasn't there, and Mum would call me later and say, "He did it again." 9 o'clock, barking at the corner. Other nights I was there and watched it all myself, my skin prickling while nothing visible moved in that room. One night, when I was out partying and Mum had my dog in her room with her, she told me he suddenly went from relaxed to alert. He jumped up on the bed and began staring at a point near the ceiling. Then he started growling, not a small warning growl, but a deep, continuous one that went on for several minutes. His eyes followed something that crawled or moved along the ceiling, silently, invisibly. Mum kept telling him it was all right, that there was nothing there, but he wouldn't calm down. He just tracked whatever it was with his eyes and growled, over and over. Another time, she was alone, sitting on the couch in the evening, while my dog lay on the floor. The house was quiet. Suddenly, there was a loud metallic crash from the pantry. She almost jumped out of her skin. The pantry was a walk-in type, and inside we kept a stack of large silver mixing bowls. She got up and went to check, expecting to find the bowls scattered everywhere. Instead, only the biggest bowl had fallen. It was spinning hard on the floor, turning in fast circles like someone had thrown it down or hit it with force. The smaller bowls were still stacked neatly where they had been. There was no sign of anything collapsing or slipping. Just that single big bowl, spinning wildly on its own while the others stayed untouched. She stood there for a moment, watching it spin, wondering how long it had been turning before she walked in. There was no open window to explain a draft, no one else in the house, nothing leaning against the shelves. Just that one bowl, dancing in circles on the floor like some invisible hand had knocked it down. The newest strange thing involves my great-grandmother. She passed away recently, and my mother inherited her favorite recliner chair. It was the chair she loved, the one she always used to sit in. Mum put it in pride of place in her lounge, like a little piece of Nan had moved in with her. There is a blanket draped over the back of the recliner, loosely hung over the top. Most mornings now, when Mum gets up, the blanket isn't how she left it. Sometimes it is pressed down into the seat, with a clear dip as if someone has been sitting there for a while. Other times, the sides of the blanket are tucked neatly down into the sides of the chair, exactly the way my great-nan used to keep it when she was alive. Mum doesn't tuck it that way. I don't. My brother doesn't live there anymore, and the old Nan downstairs can't make it up the stairs without help, let alone rearrange blankets in the middle of the night. It's always the same chair, always the same blanket. Always in a way that makes us think of her hands smoothing it into place. So I grew up in a strange mix of fear and familiarity with things I couldn't quite explain. As a baby, I wouldn't sleep without light and music. As a child, I felt eyes on me in the dark and heard breathing by my bed. My brother heard his name whispered and switched bedrooms to escape it. We both saw things at Dad's that didn't make sense, like torchlight on furniture when no one had a torch. When Pop died, shelves fell, bird feeders dropped, clocks moved themselves. Cats jumped as if someone pulled their tails, and Nan felt him sit by her in bed. In our house, my dog stares at invisible corners, growls at the ceiling, avoids patches of floor where nothing is standing, and watches something we can't see. Bowls spin on the pantry floor. Blankets arrange themselves on old recliners the way their previous owners liked to keep them. On paper, you could probably find a logical explanation for each thing one by one. A draft here, a loose chain there, a dog reacting to a sound humans can't hear. But all of it together, spread across years and different houses and different people, starts to feel like something else. I still sleep better with a bit of light on. I still get that feeling sometimes, that heavy sense that someone is nearby, just watching. Not always in a bad way, but always a little too close to ignore. And every so often when I visit Mom and my dog stands rigid in a doorway, barking at a corner of an empty room around 9 at night, part of me can't help wondering who's really there. My friend Lila was about to turn 10, and she invited me, Imogen, and Sonia to her birthday slumber party. We were so excited because it was going to be 2 nights and 3 days at her house. Layla lived there with her mom, her little sister Charlie, and her baby sister. The first night, we were all out on the back porch, talking and laughing the way 10-year-old girls do, full of sugar and secrets. It got late and everything in the house went quiet. At some point, we suddenly heard crying. It sounded like a little girl, like the kind of crying you do when you're scared, not just sad. We all froze and looked at each other. "That must be Charlie," someone said. We imagined she was having a nightmare or something, so we went inside to check on her. We tiptoed into her room, expecting to see her sitting up or tossing around, but she was completely fine. She was fast asleep, breathing slowly, her face relaxed. There were no tears on her cheeks, no signs she had been crying at all. The baby was quiet too. We went back to our sleeping bags a bit unsettled, but tried to brush it off. In the morning, over breakfast, we asked Charlie if she'd had a bad dream or if she had been crying in the night. She looked confused and said no. Then she added in a small voice that she had heard someone crying too. That was the first scare. Later that same day, the 4 of us walked to the skate park around the corner. The skate park sat right in the middle of a big oval. At the far end of the oval, there was a line of trees, almost like a small forest. We'd spent plenty of afternoons there before, kicking a ball around or just hanging in the trees, gossiping and telling jokes. It wasn't a new place. It had always just felt like a normal part of our neighborhood. We decided to wander over to the trees again. As we were walking across the grass, we were talking and laughing, not thinking about anything scary. Then, without any warning, Sonia fell backwards. She didn't trip on anything. She just suddenly hit the ground hard and started screaming. The rest of us screamed too, our minds not even registering what had happened, just reacting to her fear. When we helped her sit up and calm down, she was shaking. She said that as she fell, she felt like something was pulling her, like invisible hands were dragging her away from us. It wasn't just losing her balance, she said it felt deliberate. We were all shaken, but we tried to convince ourselves she must have stumbled, or maybe she felt dizzy. We eventually kept walking and made it to the trees. We stood there in the shade, talking again, trying to act like everything was normal. It felt like only 5 minutes had passed when I decided to look around. I glanced past the tree trunks and my eyes landed on something that made my whole body go cold. There was a black shape standing among the trees, watching us. It wasn't a shadow from the branches or a trick of the light. It was darker than everything around it, like a person made of smoke or ink. I couldn't make out a face, but I could feel it looking at us. The moment I realized what I was seeing, I started screaming. The others spun around, saw it too, and began screaming with me. As we stared at it, it seemed to move closer. But it didn't walk the way a normal person would. It appeared behind one tree, then suddenly it was behind another, and then another, like it was skipping through space instead of moving through it. 1 second it was further back, the next it was closer. Always half hidden by trunks, always facing us. The more it did this, the more my heart pounded in my chest. That was it. We turned and ran. I am not a fast runner. Normally I'm always last in races at school, but that day I swear I have never run that fast in my life. The 4 of us sprinted across the oval, breath burning in our lungs, not daring to look back. Every second felt like it lasted forever. All I could think was, don't fall, just get to the house. We reached Lila's front door and started banging on it frantically. It felt like we were there for hours, but it was probably only half a minute before her mom opened the door. We rushed inside, talking over each other, trying to explain what we'd seen, the black shape, the way it jumped from tree to tree, how it felt like it was chasing us. Lila's mom listened, but you could tell she didn't really believe us. She tried to calm us down, saying it was just shadows or our eyes playing tricks on us. We tried to accept that, but none of us completely believed it. That night, we tried to distract ourselves with movies. We decided to sleep outside again on the back porch in our sleeping bags. The air was hot. It must have been around 40 degrees, even that late. The porch was dim, lit by the glow from a small light inside and the brightness of the almost full moon. While the last movie was playing, Lila suddenly rubbed her arms and whispered that something cold and icy had touched her. She insisted it wasn't the wind, and she was right. The night was hot and still. We all went quiet and glanced around, trying to see if anything was there, but we didn't see anything. Eventually, one by one, we drifted off. We finally fell asleep sometime around 12:30. I'm a heavy sleeper, the kind of person who usually doesn't wake up for anything. But that night, something pulled me out of sleep at about 4 in the morning. My eyes blinked open slowly, and for a moment I didn't know why I was awake. The porch was dark and quiet, and the movie had finished long ago. Then I noticed Sonia. She was sitting up in her sleeping bag, knees pulled to her chest, staring at something with the most terrified expression I have ever seen on her face. Her eyes were wide and glassy, her mouth slightly open like she wanted to scream but couldn't. I followed her gaze. She was looking at Lila. Lila was standing upright at the edge of the porch, facing the backyard. Her sleeping bag lay crumpled behind her. She wasn't a sleepwalker. We all knew that. When she fell asleep, she stayed asleep. That's why, for a moment, my brain couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. "Lila?" I whispered. She turned around slowly and looked straight at me. For 1 second, just one single second, her face didn't look like her face. In that brief flash, I saw her features twisted and wrong. Her skin looked soaked in blood, her mouth dripping with it. Her eyes glowed a deep, unnatural red, like something angry and alive was staring out through her instead of our friend. It wasn't a shadow or the light playing tricks. It was too clear, too sharp, and it hit me like a punch to the chest. I blinked hard. Just like that, everything snapped back to normal. She was just Lila again, standing there looking confused and sleepy, as if she had no idea why she was out of her sleeping bag. The blood was gone. Her eyes were normal. For a second I wondered if I had imagined it, if my overtired brain had gone too far after everything that had happened. But I'll never forget that image. I can still see it when I close my eyes. The crying that first night, the black thing in the trees jumping closer and closer, and Lila standing in the dark, her face wrong for just a heartbeat. Out of everything that happened that weekend, that 1 second was the scariest thing I have ever experienced. I have always been sensitive to things I can't quite see. For as long as I can remember, I've picked up on strange feelings in places, on shifts in the air that no one else seemed to notice, on moods that didn't belong to anyone in the room. Still, I grew up very non-religious. I don't follow any faith, I don't go to church or temple, and I don't think in terms of heaven and hell the way most people do. But even without religion, I believe in certain things. In evil, in spirits, in demons, in whatever you want to call the darker side of the unseen. And lately, after everything that's happened, I also believe there might be something like angels too. But this story isn't about angels. This is about the time things changed for me. Before this, I'd had small experiences, little moments that made me pause, tiny chills, the feeling that someone had just stepped out of a room. I used to shrug those things off and move on. After this, I couldn't shrug anything off anymore. For a while, I lived far away from home on an extremely remote island. I won't say where it was or why I was there, but it was one of those places that feels like the edge of the world. There were no crowds, no traffic sounds, no city lights glowing in the distance. At night, the sky was pitch black, except for the stars, and the wind off the water sounded like it was carrying voices from somewhere very far away. I lived in a cabin-style house with 6 other people. From the outside, the house looked simple and practical. A long, low building, a faded roof, a veranda that wrapped around part of it. Inside, it was warmer. Narrow hallway, plain bedrooms, a basic kitchen, shared living area. You could hear everything that happened because the walls were thin, and the place was small enough that one person getting up at night felt like everyone was moving. Not long after we all settled in, people started talking. One person would mention something small over breakfast, almost as a joke. Another would add a detail. Then someone else would say, "Actually, that happened to me too." At first, it was easy to laugh about it, but slowly things formed a pattern. Footsteps in the hallway when everyone was in bed, the shower turning on in the middle of the night, cupboard doors banging by themselves, the linen closet door creaking open and shut for no reason. Someone hearing running footsteps outside their window when nobody was out there. It felt like stories you tell around a campfire. I am a strong believer in the paranormal, so you'd think I'd be the first person to jump in and say there was something there. But at the start, even I tried to be logical. I thought they were exaggerating, or maybe nerves were getting to everyone. We were isolated, away from home, pushed together in this one house. Maybe the wind was making the old hinges move. Maybe the plumbing was bad. Maybe people were dreaming. That's what I told myself. We all took a lot of photos that year, of the island, of ourselves, of the house. It was our way of killing time and keeping memories. That's when something else started to show up. Almost every time we took pictures inside the house, especially in the bedrooms and in the hallway, there were orbs in the photos. Not just one faint smudge here or there. Sometimes there were so many that it looked like the air was full of small pale circles. In some pictures, a couple of the orbs looked like they had vague faces in them, as if the light was trying to shape itself into eyes and a mouth. People joked about it. "Look at all the ghosts," someone would laugh, flipping through photos. "This place is crowded." But the jokes never completely covered the way their voices dropped just a little when they said it, or the way everyone zoomed in too far on certain photos just to check. The room I slept in was at the end of the hallway. I shared it with one other housemate. 2 beds, a couple of small cupboards, a window, and that was about it. The layout was simple, but the feeling in the room was not. From almost the first night, I felt something in one particular corner of that room. The corner was just walls and shadow. There was nothing special there. No furniture, no boxes, no mirror, nothing. But I hated having my back facing it. Even during the day, if I sat on my bed and looked up, that corner always pulled at my eyes. It was like walking into a house and immediately noticing one chair because someone had just been sitting in it. Except this chair was invisible. I can't explain how I knew, but I felt that something stood there. I tried to ignore it at first. I told myself it was just my mind making shapes out of nothing, the way you see animals in clouds. But sometimes at night, lying in bed, I would look over and I could swear I saw a darker patch there, an outline where the darkness was just a little heavier than the rest. Once, I saw what looked like a figure. Nothing clear, no face I could describe, but a human-shaped darkness, standing quiet and still. Every time I let my eyes linger, a wave of discomfort ran through me. Not just the normal creepiness of a dark room, but a deep, sharp feeling in my stomach that said clearly, "Don't go near that corner. Don't turn your back on it. Don't invite it closer." One day, trying to prove to myself that I was being silly, I took a photo of the room from my bed. I made sure to get that corner in the shot. When I looked at the picture, there was a single large orb right there in that corner. Not faint, not half hidden, bright and clear, sitting exactly where my instinct said something was. A cold feeling slid down my spine. I remember staring at that photo for a long time, zooming in, zooming out, checking for dust on the lens, playing with the light. The orb stayed exactly where it had first appeared, as if it were watching me through the screen. That was the moment I stopped brushing it off. I didn't go around screaming that the place was haunted, but inside I accepted that my feelings weren't completely in my head. As the weeks went by, the stories from other people in the house got stranger and more intense. There were footsteps walking up and down the hallway at night when everyone was in bed. Doors opened by themselves, sometimes gently, sometimes with force, as if someone impatient had pushed them wide. Kitchen drawers and cupboard doors banged and rattled, especially in the early hours when everything else was quiet. The linen closet door near the hallway, people said, would sometimes creak open and then slam shut over and over for no reason. The toilet flushed on its own. The shower turned on in the middle of the night when nobody was in the bathroom. Some people said they heard running outside their windows, sometimes slow and heavy, sometimes fast, like someone sprinting past on wet ground. There were also reports of strange voices outside at night, low talking, muffled conversations, and once or twice a high, weird scream that didn't sound like any animal they knew. It didn't stop there. Things started to feel darker. There were a few nights when someone would say that one of the others had started seizuring in their sleep. They'd use that word even if the person never had a medical history of seizures. Someone would jerk or twist in bed in a way that looked unnatural, and when they woke up, they'd say things they couldn't remember saying. A couple of people talked about hearing someone speaking in tongues, a stream of strange words that didn't sound like a language they recognized. Those episodes were rare, but each time, the fear in the house went up another level. For a while, I was one of the only people who hadn't had anything big happen directly to me. I heard the noises, I saw the orbs in the photos. I felt that watching presence in my room, but nothing had targeted me personally yet. Part of me was relieved. Another part of me felt like I was waiting for something. I didn't have to wait long. One night, everything changed. I don't know what day it was exactly, but it was sometime in the colder months. The air outside was sharp and the wind picked up more than usual, banging loose things around the cabin and pushing against the windows. Inside our room, it was cold too, even with the thin blankets piled up. My roommate fell asleep before I did. I remember listening to the wind, watching the faint light from the hallway creep under the door, and feeling that same old dread coming from the corner. Eventually, I drifted off. Then, I had a nightmare. I am not going to describe that dream in detail. Even now, it feels too heavy and wrong to put into words. All I will say is that it was one of the most disturbing dreams I have ever had in my life. It wasn't just the images or what happened in it. It was the feeling that came with it, like something dirty and hostile pressing itself into my mind, using my fears against me, making me see exactly what would shake me the most. I woke up in a rush, like I had been thrown out of the dark and into my body. I was covered in sweat, but the air in the room was icy cold. My heart was racing. My breathing was sharp and shallow, and my whole body was shaking. At first I thought I was just cold, but the shaking wasn't like a normal shiver. It went deeper, like my muscles were trying to climb out of my bones. I lay there, curled slightly on my side in the top bunk, trying to make sense of where I was. The dream still clung to me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw parts of it, faces half formed in the darkness behind my eyelids, flashes of the worst moments. I realized I was making the bunk bed move. Every tremor in my body shook the mattress, and the bed frame creaked quietly. I was afraid my roommate would wake up. It must have been between 3 and 4 in the morning, the dead hours, the time of night when most people are deep asleep and the world feels the emptiest. I pulled the blanket tighter around me and tried to steady my breathing. I told myself over and over, it was just a dream. Just a nightmare. You're safe. You're in bed, there's nothing here. But as I lay there, I could feel my mind slipping between two different fears. The memory of what I had dreamt, and the sense that something else in the room was very aware that I was awake and vulnerable. I closed my eyes again for a moment. Instantly, as if waiting, more faces swam up against the darkness. They were not complete or clear. Eyes, strange shapes, but each one brought the same sick feeling. I opened my eyes again, staring up at the underside of the ceiling, wishing I could change rooms or switch beds or run outside or do anything that would break the feeling. Slowly, my heartbeat calmed a little. The shaking became less violent. I started to tell myself that I was overreacting, that it was a combination of a bad dream, the cold, and everyone else's stories stuck in my head. I focused on the sound of the wind, the soft breathing of my roommate below me, the familiar creaks of the house settling. That was when I heard it. At first it was just a faint noise, like a distant creak. Then more sounds joined it. From the direction of the hallway and the kitchen, I began to hear things that did not belong to the wind or to the normal sounds of an old house at night. A cupboard door opening and closing. A slow, drawn-out squeak of hinges, followed by a soft thud. Then again, open, shut, open, shut. The linen closet door. I knew that sound. I had heard it in the daytime and from my bed at night when someone went for towels. only now it went on and on, with a rhythm that didn't sound like a person going to get something and then leaving. It sounded like someone or something standing there, opening the door all the way and letting it creak, then slamming it shut, then opening it again. Over and over. And that door was right next to my bedroom. Other noises joined in. A faint, hard sound like footsteps on the hallway floorboards. A cupboard drawer sliding open in the kitchen, then shutting suddenly. Something small falling over and rolling. The house, which had felt quiet a few moments ago, now sounded busy, as if someone had decided this was the perfect time to rummage through everything. Every tiny bit of calm I had gained vanished. I lay in bed, my eyes wide, staring at the darkness above me, and felt the shaking return. It's just the wind, part of my brain said. Old pipes, loose hinges, your imagination. But another part of me, the part that had felt that cold corner since the day I moved in, knew better. It knew that the house did not want me calm. It knew that whatever stood in that corner liked nights like this. Then the worst part came. I was starting to drift in and out of a light, uneasy half-sleep, ignoring the noises the best I could, when I heard something so close and so wrong that my body went completely rigid. There was the sound of someone running on wet grass, directly outside my window, right beside my head. If you've ever heard a person run on damp or muddy ground, you know it doesn't sound like dry footsteps. There's a softness to it, a slight sticky slap, the sound of weight hitting something that gives way a little. That's what I heard. Not one or two steps passing by, but several, fast and heavy, like someone sprinting past my window, close enough that if the wall wasn't there, I could have reached out and touched them. It was not a dog. It was not a wallaby. I knew the sounds of animals on that island, the patterns of their movement, the way they stopped and started. This was different. It was the exact rhythm of a human run. Heel, took, and urgent. I did not turn my head. I lay there, every muscle tight, holding my breath, staring straight ahead at nothing. I didn't even dare shift my eyes toward the window. A heavy certainty pressed down on me. If I turned my head, if I even glanced that way, something would be standing right there outside the glass, looking back at me from the darkness. I knew it the way you know when someone is standing behind you without seeing them. Earlier that night, I had left the window open a little to let some fresh air in, and then forgotten to close it properly. Realizing that made everything worse. In my mind, I could feel cold air pushing in through that small gap, carrying the sense of something standing inches away from me. The idea that whatever was out there could reach through that gap, or at least press its presence closer, made my skin crawl. After a while, the running footsteps stopped. I tried to breathe slowly. I told myself again that I was just scared because of the dream. I tried counting my breaths, focusing on each inhale and exhale, but my ears stayed wide open, catching every sound around me. Just when I thought maybe I could calm down again, the running came back. This time, there was something else with it. Along with the sound of feet pounding on wet grass, there was a screeching noise. Not a metal screech, not like nails on a chalkboard, but more like something dragging along glass, a high scraping sound, irregular and jagged, like someone slowly scratching their nails down a window. It was right beside my head. The sound of running, the sound of scratching, the feeling of something pushing its attention at me through the glass. It was too much. Instinct took over. I grabbed my blanket with shaky hands, pulled it over my head, and curled up as tightly as I could. Under the covers, the air was hot and stuffy from my breath, but it felt safer than the cold, open space around me. I squeezed my eyes shut and refused to look, no matter what sounds I heard next. I don't even remember how long it went on. Time became strange. It could have been 2 minutes or 20. I just stayed under the blanket, listening to my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, whispering inside my head, "Go away. Leave me alone. Please, just go." Eventually, I must have drifted off again. Fear is exhausting, and my body could only take so much. When I woke up in the morning, daylight was coming through the same window. The room looked normal. My roommate was getting dressed, yawning, complaining about being tired. I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at the window and then at the corner of the room, as if I could catch some leftover trace of what had been there. Nothing looked out of place, but inside I knew everything had changed. From that night on, the house no longer felt like a simple, creepy building with some odd noises and a strange corner. It felt like something in it had focused directly on me, like I'd been picked out of the crowd. The nightmare, the shaking, the sounds in the hallway, the pounding footsteps right by my head, the scratching on the window, none of that felt random anymore. Small things that I could handle before became heavy. Taking a shower turned into something close to panic. I would stand under the water, staring at the shower curtain, certain that if I pulled it back too quickly, I'd find the thing from my nightmare standing there. Sometimes the fear was so sharp that I washed as fast as I could, my heart racing, just to get out of the bathroom. The sound of water running, which should have been relaxing, made me feel exposed and blind, like something could be creeping up behind me while my eyes were closed. Going to the toilet became its own test of courage. I would sit there and choose one corner of the small tiled room and stare at it without blinking until I was done, because I was afraid that if I looked away, something would move there. Sometimes I would feel that prickling on my neck, that same wordless warning I'd felt in the bedroom corner, and I'd have to force myself to stay calm, to finish, to leave the room normally instead of running. At night, lying in bed, I could not lie with my back to the room anymore. I always had to face the door or the window, even though both options frightened me. If I closed my eyes for more than a few seconds, shapes and faces would try to form in the dark, like the dream was waiting just behind my eyelids, wanting to come through again. Sometimes I could hear faint noises in the hallway and tell myself they were just pipes or the wind, but there was always that deeper part of me, that sensitive part, that whispered, "No. You know what this is." Other people in the house still had their own experiences. They talked about doors opening in the night, whispers in the hallway, drawers slamming, strange noises outside. They sometimes mentioned feeling watched in certain rooms, or waking up to the feeling that someone was standing over them. But for me, everything had become personal now. The corner in my bedroom, the orb in the photo, the nightmare, the running, the scratching. All of it came together into one heavy feeling that never really left. Even after I left that island, the memory stayed with me. It's like something shifted permanently inside me that night. I don't walk into dark rooms the same way anymore. I don't treat strange sounds as just house noises. I listen harder. I watch more carefully. I try not to invite things in, even in my thoughts. I still don't follow any religion. I still don't use words like possession lightly, and I don't blame spirits for everything bad that happens. But I can't pretend the unseen doesn't exist. I have felt it. I've lain in bed with my heart racing while something ran past my window in the dead of night and scratched at the glass beside my head. I've stood in a bathroom, staring at one spot in the corner because I was sure someone or something was there, even if I couldn't see it. People can say it was stress or the wind or dreams or the mind playing tricks. Maybe some of it was. But deep down, I know there was something else in that house. Something that liked to move through the hallway at night. Something that stood in that corner of my bedroom. Something that knew exactly when I was most afraid. And on that night, when I woke up shaking from a nightmare I still can't talk about, it made sure I knew it was there. I never imagined that an ordinary household chore could push me so close to the edge of horror. Back in those days, my two youngest siblings and I split the nightly duty of walking our family's dogs before we all headed for bed. On the surface, that arrangement sounded easy. Clip a leash on each animal, let them nose around the backyard or the neighborhood for 15 minutes, bring them inside, give them water, and turn off the porch light when everyone was safely in. What complicated the routine was the fact that I, despite being the eldest and the strongest, carried a lifelong fear of werewolves. I know it sounds childish, but the very idea of tall, ragged shapes moving on two legs beneath a glow-white moon haunted me whenever I stepped into the dark. Films, books, playground tales. If a story involved human bodies twisting into snarling half-wolves, I stored every detail in my imagination and replayed it the next time I found myself outside after sunset. My sister Alexis and my brother Christian teased me often, though kindly, about what they called my full moon jitters. Because of that fear, I turned into a master delegator at night. I was 19 at the time, 5'3", broad-shouldered from years of basketball drills, easily strong enough to control our two dogs, yet I still nudged my siblings, both smaller and younger than I, to handle most of the actual walking. Alexis was 15 and tiny, barely clearing 4'11", with clever fox-brown eyes and a will as sharp as a sewing needle. Christian was 12, 4'6" on a good day, all elbows and knees, but already tough from chasing soccer balls across half the parks in our county. In truth, they adored any excuse to tramp around with flashlights, and most nights they agreed without complaint. Ordinary dogs might have made that chore simpler. Our male German Shepherd Zeus already weighed a healthy 100 pounds, but anyone who saw him on the sidewalk could tell he was more sweetheart than soldier. Our second dog, Storm, was another matter. Storm belonged to the European Warlock line of Dobermans, a family of working animals bred across generations to tackle wild boar, fend off human intruders, and face down dangers that would send smaller pets yelping beneath the nearest bed. She was huge, nearly as tall at the shoulder as Christian and heavier than Alexis by at least 40 pounds. Jet black coat, rust markings above her slanted amber eyes, a jaw that could open wider than any normal dog's, and canines that stretched a good 2 inches from gum to tip. My mother ordered Storm from a specialized breeder years earlier and drove nearly 6 hours to collect her, paying close to $3,000 for the privilege. Then, when Storm was barely 8 weeks old, she contracted a nasty case of parvo, and Mom forked out an additional $2,500 to cover all the emergency injections and isolation care. My mother viewed that dog the way most people view a priceless violin. Unbelievably expensive, impossible to replace, and something she would protect at any cost. If animal control ever called us in for negligence, my mother would march downtown herself and probably hire a lawyer within the hour. So each night, leash duty fell to the three of us. I understood that the smart thing, the truly fair thing, would have been for me to grip Storm's leash personally, given the sheer power bundled in her shoulders. Yet on most evenings, I convinced Alexis to manage Storm, Christian to manage Zeus, and I stayed on the porch, pretending to gather the mail or to secure the old latch on the gate until they returned. No one complained as long as Storm behaved and Zeus trotted back tired. One spring night, a thin crescent moon hovered in the sky like a bird's claw. Mom and our stepmother had left for a late work meeting and warned that they wouldn't return until close to midnight. Shortly after 10, I stepped onto the porch and called Alexis and Christian to handle their chore. They came willingly enough, tugging jackets over t-shirts while I clipped Storm's heavy braided leather leash into her collar and handed the handle to Alexis. Then I secured Zeus's line and gave it to Christian. The usual warning spilled out of me. Don't let go. Keep the flashlights pointed at the ground so you don't blind the dogs when they look back, and if you hear coyotes yip, head home. Christian rolled his eyes. Alexis smirked and said, "Yes, Mom number 3," which was her gentle way of teasing me about my habit of rattling instructions. They clicked on their lights and started down the driveway. Not even 5 minutes later, the front door banged open. Both siblings hurried inside, as pale as milk, wide-eyed and already crying. Zeus trotted beside Christian, but Storm's leash dangled empty in Alexis's fist. Storm was gone. At once I felt the dual waves of fear and frustration crash through me. My throat tightened, but I forced my voice low and calm. "Tell me what happened," I said, trying to keep nerves from pure outrage from bubbling into my tone. They explained that they'd walked only halfway down the block when both dogs stiffened, ears forward, nostrils twitching. Before Christian could say, "Should we turn around?" Storm lunged. Alexis's feet skidded across the pavement. Christian tried to bolster her grip by grabbing Storm's leash near the clasp, but Zeus barked and zipped the opposite direction. Instinct forced Christian to hold on to Zeus instead of the bigger dog. Alexis lost balance. The leather slipped through her fingers, and Storm vanished into the tree line at the back of a neighbor's property. Zeus, confused and anxious, pulled Christian all the way back onto the street. Alexis chased after them, and together they hurried home, terrified that Storm would tackle a jogger, a deer, or worse, wind up reported to animal control. I inhaled slowly, a trick Dad taught me to calm nerves when something broke at the house. No time to scold. We had a missing 160-pound Doberman who might frighten anyone outside. I told the others to grab spare leashes, their flashlights, and their bikes. They dashed to the garage for bicycles and the coil of spare nylon leads. I pulled on a jacket, laced shoes, grabbed the last working flashlight on the kitchen hook, and stepped outside. Alexis and Christian wheeled their bikes onto the driveway. Alexis placed Storm's lost leash in her hoodie pocket. We might need it once we found our dog. The night air felt unusually cold against my face, the kind of cold that dries mouth corners and stiffens knuckles. We formed a plan. They would ride the neighborhood streets calling Storm's name and scanning driveways and hedgerows, any place a large dog might linger. I, without a bike, would cut straight into the woods behind the subdivision. Those woods weren't huge, a few dozen acres at most, but they stretched in a crooked band behind several streets. Houses backed right up against the brush, and kids had flattened countless footpaths through the trees over the years, but the canopy could feel dense and echoing after dark. The dogs knew the area well because Mom sometimes let Storm track scents along the edges during morning walks. If Storm had gone wild chasing a rabbit, the forest was the most likely place to find her. In hindsight, letting my siblings separate from me was a gamble. A part of me, a big, soft, protective older sister part, hated the idea of Christian pedaling alone past midnight lampposts, but time mattered, and we all understood Storm's strength. The longer she roamed, the farther she might travel. So I nodded at Alexis, whispered, "Call me if you see anything," and stepped across the damp grass toward the first line of trees. Their bike tires rattled over the asphalt, headlights bobbing, voices shouting, "Storm! Here, girl!" as they vanished around a corner. The first thing I noticed in the woods was how dark everything felt, compared to the yellow-orange streetlights behind. My flashlight cut a tunnel of hazy white through tall pines, illuminating pockets of mist that hugged the trunks. Right away I found prints, Storm's. No mistaking them. Large as a human palm, deep in damp soil, toes splayed at a powerful sprint. I knelt, pressed my fingers along a toe print, and found it still moist, less than 10 minutes old. That was encouraging and terrifying at the same time. I kept moving, careful to whisper Storm's name every few steps so that if she lurked nearby, she might approach. In my mind, I replayed the worst possibilities. Storm grappling with a raccoon carrying distemper, Storm running into a property owner's yard and getting shot, Storm injuring a jogger, and my mom forced to surrender her. Each outcome squeezed my chest tighter. The deeper I walked, the thicker the branches knitted overhead. My flashlight made every leaf seem silver. A breeze occasionally stirred, and small rattles of movement rippled across the undergrowth. For a stretch, those sounds relaxed me. Rustling leaps of rabbits, the quick scratch of a squirrel darting up a trunk, maybe the faint scuttle of a possum. Natural night noises loaded with mundane explanations. After maybe 10 minutes, I heard heavier footfalls, pads striking moist ground in a gallop. I stopped. The steps seemed 4 beat, like a big cat or a wolf on all fours, not the 2-beat stride of a human. That detail comforted me. My brain already pictured werewolves, so hearing 4 distinct impacts banished that particular demon. I called Storm again. The footfalls ceased. Silence pooled in every direction. Then, with an almost polite rustle, the animal darted away through brush. My heart hammered. If that was Storm, why sprint off? Maybe she sensed I was close and wanted to lure me into a game, or maybe she smelled something else. I quickened my pace. After another stretch of twisting through branches, I reached a part of the forest I rarely visited. There, through the thinning tree line, I glimpsed a shape I had never noticed, a shack, barely larger than a garden shed, crouched beneath drooping limbs. The boards looked bleached gray by years of weather. Most of the roof shingles were gone. One square window beside the door had shattered into jagged triangles long ago. An odd feeling prickled through me. I flicked my light off and stood very still. Why step toward a shack in an unfamiliar wood at night? Every horror film instinct screamed at me to retreat. But Storm could have entered. Curiosity and duty overpowered caution. I moved forward, planting each heel softly to reduce crunching leaves. Lantern yellow moonlight spilled across the clearing just enough for me to see that the door hung slightly ajar. I crouched, pressed my ear to a moisture-warped board, and listened. I heard nothing. No wheezing dog, no scrabbling rodent, no human. Before logic won the argument, my hand closed around the splintery knob. It turned with a soft click. Inside smelled of mildew and dry earth. Even without switching on my flashlight, I could see small mounds of newspaper piled around. Some stacked neatly, others scattered as though the wind had blown them into nests. Titles dated back to 1962. Some were from the 80s, others as recent as 2013. Comics, employment ads, missing person notices, local sports scores. Each page folded crisp but yellowed. I imagined a lonely collector hauling papers here in decades past. Something about the arrangement, chronological stacks arranged like towers, made the shack feel more lived in than abandoned. Halfway to the center, I squatted to pick up a headline about the moon landing anniversary. I scanned a bit of text, silence humming in my ears. Then footsteps, heavy ones outside. They came deliberately, not caring about stealth, just step, pause, step. My first thought was the property owner returning to check the shack. I released the paper, felt my throat constrict, and considered turning my flashlight back on. Yet something rooted me still. A gut instinct told me that whoever or whatever walked outside was not going to appreciate a bright beam in its eyes. Then I heard my name, or rather a name that only two people ever used. Faith, Alexis's voice. I exhaled and sagged with relief. Alexis, I almost said, but a pinprick of doubt halted me. Her tone had an odd neutrality, flat, uninflected, almost mechanical, as if she had practiced the syllables but missed the underlying emotion. "Are you there?" Another voice called. It resembled Christian's, higher than a man's, younger than 15, but something in it felt hollow. Perhaps I was spooking myself. Paranoia can twist familiar sounds. Then Alexis's voice came again. "Faith, did you find Stormy?" She never called the dog Stormy. Christian did, yes. Alexis always used Storm unless she was being intentionally silly. I held my breath. "Come out here, let's look together." The same neutral tone, no hint of her usual sarcasm. My fingers tightened around my flashlight. A deep cold crawled over my scalp. I didn't move. I peered through the broken window. Only one silhouette stood outside, backlit by moonlight, much too tall to be Alexis, taller than me by nearly 3 feet, maybe 4. The silhouette had a long, tapered beard and what looked like horns rising from the brow. My blood iced. Was that an illusion of branches? I blinked. The figure turned its head toward a new rustle in the trees. Something else once again moved in the underbrush. A heavy body, four-legged, snuffling. Maria. That deep voice rolled again. No one in my family called me Maria except for official forms, and my brother never used it. Even if his voice cracked that very instant, he wouldn't choose my first name. "You had better get out of there." The command vibrated like distant thunder. My knees wobbled. I refused to speak. I refused to shine light. I thought, maybe if I stay motionless, it will leave. But the figure outside continued. Now, leaves crackled to my left, inside the shack. I spun my head and glimpsed movement near the clustered newspapers. Something flattened there, as if a heavy paw slid across the floor. The silhouette outside also pivoted, attention drawn to that sound. A rumbling growl rolled from the left corner. Deep, resonant, unmistakably canine. Storm. Relief and terror tangled inside me. Storm was alive, and inside the shack, between me and the creature outside. The silhouette outside stiffened. It twisted to face the shack door. I risked turning on the flashlight, angling it low enough that the beam didn't cut through the window. Without waiting another heartbeat, I jumped up, wrenched the door open, and dashed into the clearing. Moonlight revealed Storm charging the creature. She launched upward onto hind legs, paws slapping against a torso. 6'2" when she rose, and even then her nose barely reached what must have been the creature's collarbone. Up close, I saw him, or it. Tall, easily 7.5 feet if not 8, broad at the shoulders, fur-matted white, horns curling out and back like an alpine goat's. The face combined human bones with bestial edges, eyes set too widely, nose too flattened, mouth pulled into a snarl that exposed small, jagged, almost triangular teeth. The creature grabbed Storm's shoulders, twisted, and shoved her aside. She yelped when claws raked her chest. Adrenaline drowned logic. I bolted toward the nearest tree gap, aiming for the faint glow of a street lamp through the trunks. Behind me, hoof-tipped feet slammed the earth. The creature recovered quickly and charged. I heard Storm bark again, but whether she gave chase behind us or collapsed, I couldn't tell. Branches whipped my cheeks. My flashlight beam jittered across the ground. I glimpsed bare roots, leaves, broken beer bottles, an old tire half buried, and then open grass. I sprang into a clearing, body screaming for air. Home lay maybe 4 houses east. I sprinted. Wind roared in my ears, breath hitched. I reached the lip of the clearing and felt triumph until a crushing blow slammed my ribs. The impact stole every ounce of air. Pain exploded along my side like a sledgehammer. I tumbled, skidding through damp leaves. My flashlight flew from sweaty fingers, skittered across moss and blinked out. Behind me, the creature huffed. Thick nostrils snorted. He paced forward slowly, seemingly confident. "Come now, Maria," the voice said. Smooth, almost patient. "Don't be afraid." I squeezed my eyes shut, body trembling, tears spreading hot across my face. A large hand, hoof-tipped thumb and 2 thick fingers, closed around my chin and forced my head up. His silhouette blocked moonlight, but as he leaned down, a ridge of silver lit every monstrous detail. The curving horns, the matted beard, the sideways slit pupils, and eyes shining red like live coals. A second later, light flashed across both our faces, blinding white and flickering. The creature jerked upright, releasing my chin. I blinked, disoriented, and saw Alexis and Christian standing yards away, flashlights raised, their bike headlights glowing behind them. Zeus growled beside Christian, the fur along his shoulders standing so high he seemed double his usual width. Storm limped from the shack's direction, chest streaked with dark fluid, blood or mud I couldn't tell, ears pinned flat and teeth bared. Something flickered through the creature's expression. Apprehension? Rage? He inhaled, tilted his head back, and unleashed a higher scream, an inhuman shriek that sounded like a woman and a fox crying simultaneously. The noise stabbed my eardrums. Zeus barked relentlessly and Storm lunged once more. The creature bounded backward, hooves gouging earth, turned, and vanished past the tree line with preternatural speed. Branches snapped, dust clouded, then silence. I must have blacked out briefly. Alexis's hands shook my shoulders. Christian kept repeating, "Faith, are you okay? Are you okay?" I swallowed air like water. My side pulsed with agony. Storm nudged my elbow with her huge head, trembling. Alexis steadied me under one arm while Christian collected the fallen flashlight. Together, they guided me across yards, into streetlight glow, and back to our porch. Every few seconds I asked if they had seen him. A goat-horned man? A monster? But neither answered immediately. We slid inside. I clicked every lock. My hands quaked. Christian led Zeus toward his water bowl. Alexis followed me to our shared bedroom. Once there, I nailed an old fleece blanket across the window. Perhaps futile, but the thought of any hungry eye gazing through the glass left me nauseated. The moment the final tack pressed into the drywall, my legs buckled. I collapsed onto the carpet, held my ribs, and tried not to sob. Alexis knelt beside me, voice low so we wouldn't worry Christian in the hallway. She pressed cool fingers to my feverish forehead. "You don't know what I saw," I whispered. Tears leaked across my cheeks. I explained the shack, the newspapers, the shadows, the silhouette's impossible height, the horns, that hideous mouth. Alexis listened. When I finished rambling, she swallowed hard and whispered something that still lives inside my nightmares. I saw him too. We curled on the bed, shoes still on, room still bright from the hallway bulb I refused to switch off. We left the TV on, volume low, some late-night sitcom's laugh track running to drown out the hush outside. My ribs ached terribly. I told Alexis I thought one might be cracked. She dabbed antiseptic over Storm's scraped nose while I cradled the dog's head in my lap. Storm licked my wrist in apology, then settled on the carpet, front paws jittering in restless dreams. Zeus curled closer to Christian's bed as if standing guard. Around 1 in the morning, far sooner than their expected midnight return, our 2 mothers arrived. They found us huddled in the living room. One look at my bruised side and Storm's bleeding chest sent them scrambling for car keys again. In the emergency clinic, X-rays showed 2 cracked ribs. A vet closed Storm's punctures with staples. Staff asked how we had collided with a large animal. My mother, cheeks white, claimed we were running uphill and I tripped over a fallen limb. Storm spun and Zeus panicked. I pressed lips together and nodded. The real story would invite men in white coats, or police would order a welfare check. Days passed. I recovered slowly, ribs aching whenever I coughed. Storm healed faster, staples removed within 2 weeks. Alexis and Christian rarely spoke of that night, but sometimes, when a coyote howled in the hills, Alexis's eyes grew glassy and far away. Nights grew later, darker. I refused to let anyone walk the dogs near the forest. We stayed in the yard or circled streets, blanketed by street lamps. Not long after, city workers posted signs along the county easement. Private property beyond trespassing line. Future development in progress. Bulldozers arrived with dawn, and within months the grove where we prowled that awful night stood transformed into a row of tidy duplexes with trimmed lawns. Workers cut down the shack, hauled away the rotten boards, shred old newspapers, and poured concrete. Several times from my bedroom window I watched backhoes dig earth so deep I expected to glimpse bones or horns unearthed like fossils. But crews loaded debris into dump trucks without ceremony. The first family to move into the furthest duplex kept a pair of Labradors. One evening, just after they carried boxes inside, the dogs slipped collars and bounded toward the remaining patch of trees that had not yet been cleared. Far off, I recognized the shape of Storm's old path. I sprinted across the yard to help the owners. We found the labs sniffing around the last heap of stones, perhaps part of the shack's foundation. Nothing strange lingered. They barked at a rabbit, then returned, tails wagging, to their new home. I never saw the goat-horned figure again. Yet some nights, lying awake and listening to the wind stir the gutters, I recall that unearthly scream, half woman, half fox, and I wonder if he observed the bulldozers from somewhere deeper in the woods, eyes glinting red through the underbrush, lips curling in that terrible grin, before stalking away to another forgotten shack beyond the city line. Sometimes, when moonlight spreads across the cul-de-sac and Storm lifts her head to sniff air heavy with the scent of distant wildlife, I think of how close we came, how a single fearless dog saved me, how children with flashlights turned a monster's hunger into retreat, how voices can bend inhuman when spoken by something barely wearing a human shape. And I remember that Alexis whispered, "I saw him too." That simple sentence anchors my memories to reality, because if someone else saw him, I'm not crazy. But if I'm not crazy, then he is still real, out there, walking 2 hind legs, waiting for another door to swing open. Whenever Christian asks why I insist on walking both dogs now, with 2 leashes looped around my wrist like chains on a ship anchor, I smile thinly and tell him ribs heal stronger than before. And whenever Alexis catches my gaze drifting toward the tree line, she pats my shoulder and says, "No werewolves tonight, Faith." But the quiet tension in her voice betrays her. She remembers horns, not fur. She knows what prowl exists beneath the deeper shadows where ordinary street lamps fail. That is why, even after all these years, our porch lights stay on until dawn, and our curtains stay drawn tight. Because once you have watched a creature taller than any man, with goat horns and a shriek like a nightmare, standing beneath the thinning moon, you stop believing that monsters confine themselves to bedtime stories. You learn they can walk real roads, cast real shadows, and speak your names in familiar voices, until the dog you love barrels into them, grows taller in courage, and reminds you that some guardians come wrapped in fur and teeth instead of silver bullets or blessed crosses. And you learn, most of all, that next time you must keep the leash in your own hands, no matter how deep the night or how fierce the fear, because the safety of family can depend on whether you stand your ground when the dark calls your name. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I grew up in the high country of Colorado, in a little town called Frisco. Back then, our lot still bordered a ragged acre of lodgepole pine that had managed to hold its ground against construction crews and highway expansions. The trees closed in behind our backyard like a ragged wall, and when the wind blew through them at night, Their crowns swayed and sighed the way the ocean does in a seashell. In those days, I was about 10 years old, give or take a year, because my memory for numbers never has been steady. And the woods felt older than time itself, packed with chipmunks that chattered from needle-littered branches, big-bellied squirrels that bullied the bird feeders, and mule deer that slipped between the trunks at dusk so silently that whole minutes could pass before you noticed the white flash of a tail. My friends and I used to play capture the flag back there. We called one half of the woods Middle-earth and the other half Narnia, and I knew every fallen log and half-rotted stump by heart. On a bright morning at the start of a summer break that seemed it might last forever, I wandered out from the cul-de-sac with no real plan beyond poking around for lizards. The sun sat high enough to warm the gray bark, and shallow shadows stretched at slanted angles. I had scrunched my socks down to my ankles so my legs could taste the air, and I used a crooked twig as a walking stick, tapping it on roots as I meandered. Maybe I was 20 feet beyond the last driveway when I heard it, a sound that froze every motion in my body. It was not a branch snapping or a squirrel dropping a pine cone. It was bigger, deeper, alive in a way that felt ancient. Imagine the low cough of a cougar, mix it with the rasping bellow a Hollywood movie gives a tyrannosaur, then muffle it until the notes sit just on the edge of your eardrum. The growl roar trembled through the forest floor so close that I felt vibration in my sneakers. It pressed against my spine like cold water. For one awful second, every childlike wonder drained out of me, because whatever made that sound was close enough that I should have seen it. And yet I saw nothing except sun-streaked trunks and a single jay hopping on a high branch. I remember blinking hard, half expecting some huge shape to peel away from the shadows. Nothing moved. The jay screamed its rusty hinge call and leaped out of sight. I swallowed. My heart seemed to hammer against the backs of my teeth. No one else was home to see how pale I must have looked, but I felt the color leave my cheeks. 10 seconds passed, maybe 20, chased by another low beat of that strange noise. It came again, softer but still thick with the rumble of an engine built of muscle and bone. Something in me decided that mystery was not worth solving. I turned, walked fast because every kid learns that predators chase runners, and pretended I was simply tired. The moment my sneaker soles touched driveway gravel, I let out the breath I had forgotten I was holding. I kept the story quiet, mostly because I did not know what to call the sound. A dinosaur? Absurd. A mountain lion? Too deep. A neighbor's playful pit bull with a voice like a foghorn? That seemed more comical than believable. Eventually, I lumped it under the category of weird things that happen in the woods and pushed it down into memory, where it nested like a beetle in bark waiting for the next summer. Life rolled forward. A few years later, my parents sat us down and announced we were moving north. Frisco had grown more expensive each year. Tourists clogged the ski routes, and my younger sister, tough as nails but cursed with altitude sickness, needed lower ground. They chose Montana, a state whose mountains rise like thick ribs out of the earth, yet leave wide valleys for towns to breathe. By the time we packed the last cardboard box, my age had leapt ahead to 6th grade. My voice squeaked at the edges, and the idea of new woods both thrilled me and filled me with the old sauce of dread. Our first rental house in Montana was a plain beige duplex that squatted at the mouth of a long valley. 2 deciduous trees, nobody in the family knew whether they were ash or birch, stood like twin sentinels at the edge of the skinny front yard. Their branches leaned toward each other across the sidewalk in a tangled arch that dripped silver leaves all summer. We unpacked boxes, dumped plastic bins in bedrooms, argued about who got which shelf in the bathroom cabinet, and settled into a routine that felt almost normal. One warm evening, I sprawled on my bedroom rug, translating geometry homework when restlessness pulled me upright. I have always loved windows, the way a dark pane becomes a mirror if the lamp behind you is bright enough, the way glass frames night like a painting that moves. I stepped into the hallway where the big front picture window sat wide and inviting. The living room lamp glowed behind me, leaving the yard in shifting shades of gray. Clouds masked the moon, which is the way the Montana sky likes to be, mysterious, like a storyteller saving punchlines. There, crouched in the fork of the tree nearest the duplex, I saw a shape that snapped the breath from my lungs. It looked like a man at first glance, pale skin almost luminous under the clouds, limbs stretched long and thin as willow branches. He crouched low, knees bent so wide they pointed in opposite directions, the soles of bare feet pressed against the bark for balance. He did not just stare toward the duplex. He leaned, neck craned, peering through my sister's window at the far end of the hall. My first thought was burglar. My second was statue, because the figure held so unnaturally still. I squinted. No twig glinted in his hand, so I did not think rifle or hunting bow. My pulse pounded. I flicked my lamp off so I could see without reflection glare, then looked again. Two details froze me. The arms seemed a fraction too long, the elbows lost somewhere beyond where normal joints should fold, and the flesh, though whitish, did not catch the soft glow bouncing from streetlights. It sucked in light the way pumice swallows water. I jerked my head to call for my mother, and in that instant, a heavy thump shook the siding outside my room. Beautiful, perfect silence followed. I spun back to the window. The tree branch was empty, except for leaves swaying as if from a finished jump. I forced myself to count to 5, eyes scanning every shadow in the yard. Nothing moved. Somewhere toward the mountain slope, a night bird trilled. We lived beside a patchwork of forest that crawled up into the higher country. Firs, spruce, aspen, huckleberry thickets. Elk and deer tracked muddy lines through the undergrowth. Black bear prints sometimes appeared by the pothole puddles that clung to the gravel road. But deer and elk do not climb trees. Bears are neither white nor that narrow of shoulder. And no neighbor in his right mind would scale a 30-foot trunk simply to squat and spy on a kid's bedroom. I logged the sighting as another addition to my private catalog of eerie things and tried to bury it under day-to-day chatter. That plan would have worked if the woods had not kept reminding me that unseen eyes followed travelers after sundown. 3 summers later, I landed a seasonal position with the Montana Conservation Corps. MCC crews spend their days digging drainage ditches, restoring trails, mending fences, and surveying fragile habitats across state forests and national parks. My supervisor told me that the work would involve early starts, long hikes, heavy hand tools, and a willingness to camp out for stretches so remote that even birds shake their heads at the mileage. I accepted without hesitation, hungry for adventure and a paycheck. The first week, my crew motored north toward Glacier National Park, spending daylight hours repairing a sagging fence near the Many Glacier entrance. The evenings we camped in little Forest Service sites tucked under big firs, and our second night found us at Cut Bank Campground on what locals call the East Side. By the time the last clank of cooking pots ceased and my coworkers crawled into their tents, I remained outside, scribbling notes in a weatherproof field journal. My headlamp illuminated each scratch of ink. Wind hissed through the crowns of cottonwoods. Nearby Cut Bank Creek hissed louder, tumble rollicking over rocks. When I finally zipped myself into the nylon tent and wriggled into the sleeping bag, the creek's tumble sounded like a lullaby. Somewhere around midnight, I snapped awake. At first, I blamed the sound of water hitting stones. My brain likes to reinterpret noises when the body needs a bathroom break, but the creek's song remained steady. I lay still, eyes wide, pulse quick. Then I heard a softer splash, distinct and separate, as though someone dropped a brick into a still pool rather than a rapid. I lifted the small plastic watch dangling from the gear loft. The luminous hands glowed 2 a.m. The temperature inside the tent felt colder than I remembered. I waited. Nothing but the usual creek roar. I told myself the splash must have been a trout, though deep down I doubted any fish that size existed in a shallow run. Eventually nature's call overrode caution. I shoved feet into boots, unzipped the door, and padded toward the pit toilet at the edge of camp. The outhouse smelled of pine disinfectant and damp wood. I shut the door, fiddled with the latch. Outside boots scuffed on gravel. 2 quick squeaks like rubber soles. Someone else needed the bathroom, I thought. The handle rattled once, softly, as though tested. Maybe a crew leader saw light from my headlamp under the door crack, realized it was occupied, and shuffled away. Then came a knock, 3 distinct raps. They lacked the muffled thud of knuckles. Instead, they sounded like 2 short lengths of wood colliding. My skin tingled. I muttered, "Occupied." Silence. I waited a solid minute before unlatching the door. The moon floated clean and white above the pines. No clouds, no footsteps fading down the path. I swung the headlamp beam across the grassy pullouts between tents. Nothing but sleeping nylon mounds. Farther out in the flood-pale meadow where the valley widened, something dark hunched behind tall grass. Maybe only a rock, maybe a bear, maybe a downed limb. My lamp could not cut far enough to show detail. A chill climbed my spine. I edged back to camp, scanning each tent flap until I crawled inside my own shelter and yanked the zipper down as though a thin metal track might protect flesh and bone. 2 nights later, the crew hauled surveying gear to Slide Lake, a jewel of frigid water perched a mile shy of the Canadian border. The trail in was a brutal push over root-snared slopes, across scree fields, and up switchbacks that left thighs trembling. We set out to count pika colonies, tiny mountain-dwelling lagomorphs that look like hamsters wearing teddy bear ears. But the memory I carried home had nothing to do with adorable rodents. Rain drizzled that evening, peppering tent fabric with soft thumps. Near camp, a dry creek bed cut through earth like a shallow scar, 2 feet deep, lined with stones slick from older water, but barely damp tonight. Someone had laid a small log bridge across the gap, a foot wide, 2 paces long, sturdy enough for walking, but prone to complaining whenever weight shifted above it. I knew the bridge's groans well because I enjoyed crouching in the empty creek, earlier tracing patterns in the sandy bottom. That night, rain ticking on fly sheets woke me to a different noise. The wooden bridge creaked under slow, even steps. My watch read 1:30. The next tent over housed Ryan, one of our crew leaders, who sometimes rose early to photograph stars. Maybe, I thought, he sneaked out for long exposure shots between cloud breaks. I listened. The bridge boards emitted a low moan again, then a staccato tap, as though claw tips or bare toes slid across the plank. Human boots make solid thumps. Sneakers squeak. These noises were stranger, lighter but sharper. The steps continued back and forth for 10 minutes. They ceased only when the drizzle intensified. I waited, bladder protesting. At last the night went silent except for rain. With caution I unzipped, tiptoed beyond the bridge, holding breath the entire crossing, and dashed to the latrine. Nothing lurked along the path. No figure squatted by the trees, but I swore something watched from the dark timber just beyond sight. The following summer, my second MCC season took me to the Hay Creek section of the Pacific Northwest Trail, a remote stretch where a ragged logging road carved along a mountainside. One edge dropped 20 feet into a spruce-choked ravine, the other slanted upward into a tangle of huckleberry and deadfall. We pitched tents in a narrow pullout. Darkness there was thick as tar at 3 a.m., and that was exactly the time my bladder nudged me awake again one night. I rolled out of the sleeping bag, fumbled in search of my headlamp, and cursed softly when the switch produced only a faint blink. Dead. I decided moonlight would suffice. Outside the tent, the sky wore no moon that night, just layers of cloud pressing like damp wool. I shuffled across dirt toward a spot where bushes gave partial privacy. A crack, crisp as a dry twig snapping, erupted up the slope among lodgepole pines. I froze. If it were a deer, I would hear hooves scraping bark or leaves, scattering. If a bear, heavier snuffling and unmistakable footfalls would follow. Nothing happened. Shrugging, I finished, cinched drawstring pants, and turned toward tents when another crack echoed, this time down the opposite side of the road in the valley gloom. 2 steps, I thought, 2 different places barely heartbeats apart. No normal animal covers that distance so silently. I stiffened, my breath plumed. Finally, a third sound exploded, a great thrashing, branches breaking in flurries as though an enormous body climbed a tree poorly, clutching limbs and ripping bark. Who climbs a 50-foot ponderosa at nearly 4 in the morning? I squinted into darkness, useless without light, and could distinguish nothing but a smear of deeper shadows swaying high overhead. As seconds ticked, the swaying stopped. The woods swallowed every hint of movement. Morning brought sunlight, and with it the practical laughter of my coworkers. They teased that I probably startled a porcupine or a raccoon. Maybe a mountain lion jumped from one bough to another. Rational explanations sprouted, and in daylight I almost believed them. Yet when we hiked out days later, I kept glancing uphill and downhill, half expecting an alabaster lanky figure to reappear among the trunks, knees splayed, arms dangling. One final memory haunts me, knitted to all the rest by the same uneasy thread. Months back at the Montana rental, I set about hammering a nail into a shed board to hang a new rake. Evening draped the valley, cicadas whirred, and with each hammer strike, the metallic ping echoed against the slope. When I paused to gauge the nail's depth, 3 solid knocks drifted from the tree line across our yard. Slow, deliberate, spaced exactly as my hammer blows had been. I tapped the nail again. Ping. The forest replied. Thud, 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 like 2 heavy branches clapped together. I stood still, wind rustled, but no owl hooted, no elk bugled. I waited 20 seconds and hammered once more. The echo came, again, 3 neat taps, same pitch and speed, as though something out there practiced call and response. I pictured a tall, pale shape, perhaps perched high on a branch again, arms as long as sorrow, patiently mimicking my rhythm. My chest tightened. I set the hammer down, stepped indoors, and locked the door. If something meant to speak with me, I decided we could hold conversation another day. Ideally through a thick pane of grocery store glass and in broad sunlight. Years have folded between then and now. I still backpack, but restless anxiety rides along whenever dusk hushes the forest. When friends ask why I lace my tent flaps shut like prison doors, or why I shine a headlamp at every nighttime scuffle, I smile and joke about childhood imaginations, lumbering bears, or the ever-present possibility of skunks. I rarely tell the fuller truth. My mind stores the memory of a growl deep as earth, of an ash-white man-like thing crouched in a tree, of knocking that echoes back from black timber, of footfalls heavy on an empty bridge, of shrieking voices that blend woman and fox. Maybe all these moments are separate incidents, coincidences woven by a boy's overactive fear. Maybe echoes distort, animals climb trees, strangers wander highways after midnight, but some thread ties them in my dreams. Perhaps the pale watcher that perched in Colorado has cousins in Montana, or maybe it followed our U-Haul north along the interstate. Hidden behind coal trains and wheat silos, waiting to crouch in leafy canopies by a duplex. People whisper names for such impossible trespassers: Bigfoot, Rake, Wendigo, Skinwalker. I am not certain which fits the shape that has paced my edge of seeing since childhood. All I know is that sometimes the forest knocks back, and sometimes something bigger than bare tracks wades through a summer creek in Glacier long after decent hikers crawl into bed. The next time you walk alone under branches that cradle the moon, pause your steps after a hammer blow, or a snapped twig, or a thump against a screen. Listen. If the cadence repeats, a perfect echo in rhythm, not quite matching any owl or elk you know, ask yourself who or what bothers to answer your noise with its own. And remember that some shapes squat in trees with knees spread wide, preparing to leap. Some shapes carry arms so long their elbows disappear in the dark. And some shapes, for reasons beyond our guessing, seem content to watch from shadows until you notice them, until your breath stops, until your eyes widen and memory carves the night into a story you will tell years later when the fire is low, the wind taps the shutters, and ordinary explanations fall silent. I was 13 that summer, the kind of 13 that hovers right between childhood and something heavier. We lived in the southern part of Utah, not far from the Arizona line, where the soil turns rust red after rain, and the horizon looks like it was drawn with a ruler against endless sky. Our house sat a short walk from the edge of town, halfway between 2 small hills of sage and rabbit brush. On most evenings, you could step out to the back porch and see dust clouds drifting behind the last pickup truck headed for the highway. People who do not know that country imagine an empty map, but for me, it held everything. Loud family dinners, the smell of alfalfa fields being flooded, the steady bark of our mixed-breed dogs guarding a yard nobody else wanted. I had 3 younger brothers and 1 older brother, plus 2 younger sisters, so the house always rattled like a shaken jar of marbles. That night started quietly enough, at least by our standards. My parents had gone into town to visit friends, leaving my grandmother to keep half an eye on us. The younger kids were supposed to settle down with a movie, But movies turned into pillow fights, and pillow fights became wrestling matches, and the wrestling eventually landed them in their room, trying to calm each other down. Meanwhile, I hung close to my 17-year-old brother, the way a small fish follows a larger one just to feel important. He was a year from graduating high school, quick to laugh, quick to tease, and fearless about things that still made me brace my shoulders. At 13, I wanted that fearlessness to rub off on me like chalk dust. We were in the living room, swapping jokes too silly to remember when everything changed. It began with a single scream, my mother's kind of scream, only Mom was not supposed to be home yet. Then a second voice layered in, then a third, and within seconds the sound filled every hallway. Full-throated panic, the wordless howl that tears past the ordinary yelp of surprise and shoots straight into terror. My older brother and I bolted for the source, racing down the hall to the kids' bedroom. We pushed through the half-open door and found our younger brothers and our mother huddled on the lower bunk. My sister knelt on the carpet near the wall, gripping the hem of Mom's shirt as if she could hide underneath it. Their faces explained more than their words. Huge eyes, cheeks strained pale, mouths trembling without shape. "What is it?" my brother demanded. "What happened?" All three younger kids answered at once. Their sentences tangled, but the same details kept coming back. Pounding hooves, a shaking window, a shadow that moved too fast along the south side of the house. My mom's voice quavered when she added that she had heard something galloping, like a horse in full sprint. In that part of Utah, horses were common enough that we kept feet out for neighbors' strays, so at first I was ready to shrug. But horses did not usually charge right up to the fence in the middle of a calm summer night, and horses did not make the walls vibrate unless something had spooked them badly. One little brother, he was 10, claimed he had seen the horse after the noise died down. He said it reared back onto two legs and loped away like an animal wearing a costume that did not fit. I remember the exact phrase he used because it sank a hook into my mind. Its front legs turned into arms. He tried to mime it, elbows crooked high, wrists dangling like a puppet's. My first reaction was to doubt him, but honest fear carved deep lines on his forehead. My older brother shot me a look that said we should investigate so the younger ones could sleep. He grabbed the big flashlight that always waited on the coat shelf, and I found myself yanked along toward the back door before my nerves could protest. The summer night smelled of warm dust. The stars looked as if somebody had jabbed tiny holes in thick velvet. I wanted to crawl right back into the house and shut every curtain, but pride shoved my feet over the porch step. Our dogs, 3 of them, met us the instant our soles hit dirt. They were mixes of pit bull and German shepherd, broad in the chest, thick in the jaw, the sort of animals farmers shrug about because they cannot be scared off by anything smaller than a coyote pack. That night, though, the dogs were uneasy. Their hackles lifted like porcupine quills. They fanned out and formed a loose ring around my brother and me, snarling at shadows beyond the swing set. It felt less like they were protecting the yard and more like they were protecting us, which made my skin tighten. We walked the perimeter slow, shining plastic white light across sage clumps and fence posts. The sweet scent of Russian olive drifted from the neighbor's property. Otherwise, the night was still. The oppressive kind of still that makes your own heartbeat seem rude. We completed a half circle and found nothing. The dogs settled after a time, barking only now and again as if to remind the darkness that they were not asleep. Inside, we tried to joke about the false alarm. My older brother flopped into his recliner, popped open a soda, and raised his eyebrows in a way that dared my mom to admit nerves. She forced a laugh but kept checking the back window. I lingered in the doorway to the kitchen, unsure if I should trust the silence. After a few minutes of awkward calm, Grandma shuffled from her bedroom, wearing her cardigan backward like a robe. She asked, in that matter-of-fact tone older people use when they do not want to scare children, if one of us had been calling for the dog outside her window. She had heard somebody coaxing, she said. A voice low and coaxing, repeating our dog's name in gentle syllables. She assumed it was one of the kids. But the catch, her window faced the opposite side of the house, the exact side my brother and I just finished patrolling. If we had walked that entire yard and the dogs never left our sight, who or what had whispered from the dark. At that point, my older brother's bravado cracked. He put down the soda, his fingers curled tight around the flashlight again. He tried a half smile, but his eyes had the glassy shine of real worry. He and I slept in the same room that night, though neither of us admitted it was for comfort. The dogs rotated watch duty beneath the open windowsill until sunrise. No gallop, no whisper, no clatter. Just the symphony of crickets and the occasional rustle of lizards in the weeds. Life rolled forward into the new school year, then spilled into another spring. 2 months after the first event, my aunt moved her trailer onto the next lot over. So near our place you could stand on our porch and toss a pebble onto her roof. The trailer came on an afternoon of squeaking wheels, and she spent the first week cleaning cupboards, unpacking dusty boxes, hammering pictures into thin panel walls. My parents helped often. One Saturday near harvest time, both our families piled into cars and drove a county over to pick peaches and sample the fairgrounds barbecue. I begged off because of homework. My aunt's kids were younger, my own brothers and sisters eager for peaches, and I preferred stillness to crowds. The house felt huge and oddly hollow once the 2 vehicles rumbled away. Late afternoon light slanted gold through the windows. I arranged textbooks across the coffee table, but pages refused to glue to my attention. I flipped on the TV as background noise and lay sideways on the couch. One shoulder settled near the screen door, so I could hear whenever the cars returned. The only sound besides the television was wind rattling through the stovepipe. When you spend enough hours in the desert, you learn to trust the moment your hair rises at the nape of your neck. That primal static coursed over me without warning. My ears seemed to pull in every little creak. The volume of the TV dipped away in importance, replaced by a heavy awareness that someone was studying me. I sat upright and glanced toward my aunt's trailer. Her car was gone, just as it had been earlier. No neighbors came calling. Their own ranches sat far beyond a property line, marked only by wheel tracks and dust. Then a voice floated through the stillness. My aunt's voice, unmistakable, conversational, as if she stood behind the couch. "Hey, can you come help me?" I vaulted up, stumbled to the window, and confirmed yet again that her car was not there. My aunt spoke a second time. Same sentence, same measured cadence. Logic buckled. I grabbed the knife I kept in a drawer for whittling and reclaimed the flashlight my brother had carried weeks earlier. Heart pounding, I eased the screen door open. As soon as I stepped outside, the dogs gathered, lips peeled, shoulders rigid. They circled close enough that I could feel body heat through denim. Their eyes fixed on a single knot of shadow near the far corner of the house, directly between our porch light and the trembling reflection of the moon on the trailer siding. No matter where I aimed the flashlight, the shadow refused to thin. I sensed rather than saw that the same shape that had watched from the sister's window now squatted there, waiting. I realized that if it charged, I would not outrun it. The desert offered no real hiding place, no thick walls apart from the house behind me. The knife handle felt small and laughable. Fight leaked from my bones. I whispered at the dogs to back inside. They did not budge, growls guttering low. I took one step backward toward the door. The shadow did not move. Then 2 steps. When my heel touched the threshold, I shoved myself through, slammed the door, and rammed the dull metal deadbolt home. I dialed my aunt on the landline. No cell reception out there in those days. She answered on the first ring and said they were still 10 minutes away, just leaving the fruit stand. Nobody had returned to the trailer early. Nobody had driven past the house. Outside, the dogs fanned out again, one stationed in front of each door. I peered from the hallway window and saw their silhouettes rigid, the whites of their eyes glimmering each time they glanced over shoulders. What, I wondered, frightens animals that live to chase coyotes? What whispers in a voice you recognize, even though its owner is miles away? In the morning, dry dirt filled one shallow depression by the porch steps, like something large had crouched there. No hoof prints, no paw prints, only disturbed soil that refused to hold a shape. My grandmother sprinkled salt near the lintel because that was what her mother had done in the old country to keep away spirits. My mom rolled her eyes but let the salt stay. Months later, when I took that first job with MCC sitting in the Cutbank outhouse, I heard the handle jiggle just like back home. The memory of my aunt's voice cut across my mind. "Come help me." I counted the beats of my pulse until I found enough courage to push open the door. No shape waited, but off in the open meadow I glimpsed a pale ripple, almost white against the starlit grass. Maybe a stray sheet snapping in wind, maybe a trick of moonlight, or maybe the same lanky thing trotting wide arcs around our campsite, patient as a boundary fence. Every backcountry hitch, after that, raised new echoes of the old dread. At Slide Lake, when the log bridge creaked under invisible weight, I pictured bent knees and overlong arms balancing across pine beams slick with rain. The boards complained as if something failed, tried again to step softly. 20 minutes of that measured pace felt like hours. I clutched my sleeping bag zipper and swore if the noise reached the tent door I would scream for the whole crew. The moment the creaking stopped, I sprinted for the pit toilet with rain washing dust off my boots. The bridge did not groan when I crossed, but somewhere beyond the tree line a rock rolled down a slope as if a giant hand had brushed it aside. By the time the second season set me to Hay Creek, I recognized the pattern of dread. All week, the steep drop to the valley gaped like a hungry mouth. Our sawyers felled hazard snags by day, and I helped fuel up chainsaws and haul logs. Night brought hush, then the cracking branch by the tents. The sound traveled uphill and downhill, as if one body occupied two places at once. No eyes reflected my headlamp because the batteries died. No shape loomed when I scanned darkness. But the scraping, claw-over-bark scuffle of something climbing high above the road seared itself onto memory. At this point I have accepted that I may never know the creature's name, but people in these parts have stories ready. Tales of skinwalkers, of shapeshifters, of pale watchers that mimic your own voice to draw you closer. The elders say to ignore the calls, especially if they belong to a loved one who should be far away. Do not whistle in the desert, do not wander alone after dusk, do not accept invitations from the darkness. I used to catalog such rules the way city kids memorize bus routes. Took them lightly too, imagining they belonged to fairy tales. Now I keep spare batteries in my sleeping bag pocket. I tap each tent stake twice to make sure wind will not yank it loose. I whistle for the dogs before night fully settles, and when 3 barks answer, I count again until all of them stand inside the fence. Every hammer blow I land on siding or fence posts, I follow with a moment of silence, listening for that deliberate echo from woods or creek bed. If it comes, and some summer nights I swear it still does, I lower my tools, walk to the porch, and close the door gently but firmly against whatever listens from the sage. I do not claim my experiences as proof. They are only threads woven through the ordinary cloth of life. A child's scream, a horse that gallops on 2 legs, a voice saying, "Come help me," in the wrong county, a bridge that groans under phantom weight, a tree that shakes when no wind blows. Still, those threads are bright enough that I see them every time the moon glows behind cloud cover. When someone in camp laughs off strange noises, I smile politely and stare a little longer at the line where trees meet night. Because once you have seen something crouched in a cottonwood with knees spread wide like a broken hinge, or watched fearless dogs guard doors with hackles high, you learn to leave extra plate offerings for silence and to treat every echo as a message. I am near, I am patient, and I can borrow the voices of those you trust. So if you find yourself in that part of Utah at 13, or in Montana at any age, alone near a dry creek or walking between tent flaps and latrine, and you hear a knock that copies your hammer rhythm exactly, pause. If a familiar voice calls from dark timber where no friend stands, weigh the call carefully. Some invitations you must decline, no matter how tempting, because whatever bends its knees in shadow might know your name for reasons you would rather never understand. The night the harbor monster stepped out of the sea still visits me whenever fog creeps inland or the wind drags the smell of low-tide rot through an open window. I was 15 then, 16 now, old enough to work deckhand jobs on the summer lobster fleet, but still young enough to worry what my mates think of my crushes. Yet I can trace every beat of that evening the way you trace tide lines on a chart. I can name every stone on the pier, every brush of flirtation, every echo across the old wooden dock where the thing finally showed itself. Most of all, I can replay the moment the fog swallowed the last of the daylight, because that was when the old stories began crawling out of the water to prove that adults do not tell children legends only for fun. Sometimes they tell them because the truth is harder and more dangerous than we want to admit. I grew up in a fishing village on Scotland's east coast, halfway between a cluster of working harbors and a long sweep of headland that juts into the North Sea. The place has changed names so many times it barely owns one. Locals call it the Tune, with no need for fancy punctuation. Tourists know it, if at all, as the point on the map where the coastal path kinks eastward. In winter, the town hunches under howling winds and whole weeks when the sea looks like hammered lead. In summer, it expands, shrugging off gray and welcoming campers, birdwatchers, and Americans trying to chase clan tartans across ruined castles. For us teenagers, the village sat at that sweet spot between boredom and freedom. We had cliffs to scramble, caves to explore, chip shops to raid, and pubs that looked the other way if an older cousin vouched we were close enough to drinking age. The four of us who matter in this story, me, my best mate Jamie, and two girls, Morag and Una, grew up together like harbor gulls on the same rooftop nest. Jamie and I shared classes through primary school, played the same football positions, even fancied half the same bands. He was lean and restless, quick with a grin that promised trouble if you followed him down an alley. I was taller, broader in the shoulders, trying to look older than 15, but never quite sure how to pull it off. Morag kept black curls tucked behind her ears and turned lopsided whenever she laughed. Una, her cousin, hid a wicked sense of humor behind freckles and a fringe that kept blowing across her eyes. Together, the girls formed a pair that made Jamie and me orbit them without meaning to. At the end of exam week each June, long after the last revision guide lay shred or scorched in celebratory bonfires, we fell into our summer routine. We called it Oot on the Tune, our shorthand for meeting around sunset, stocking pockets with cheap cider, and wandering through a twilight that never fully darkened before midnight in these latitudes. Half the time we ended on the rocks south of the harbor, where a crumbling lighthouse still blinked a warning from its gallery even though the Coast Guard had replaced it with GPS buoys years ago. The lighthouse's paint peeled in finger-wide curls and rust bled from every bolt. But the gallery platform gave the best view of orange sky bleeding into silver water. An abandoned wooden jetty, the old dock, locals called it, stretched beyond the lighthouse like a curved finger. The council posted keep-out signs, but we ignored them. Only tourists read warning boards. I had spent the spring convincing myself that this summer would be the summer when Morag finally noticed me as more than the tall lad who trimmed her grandma's hedge for pocket money. Jamie shared a similar mission with Una. So on the Tuesday after exams, with weather warm enough for t-shirts and winds soft enough to flatten the North Sea into hammered bronze, Jamie and I agreed on a plan. We would meet the girls at the harbor, carry chips down to the rocks, and let sunset and cider handle the rest. Jamie's older brother bought us the cans, 3 each of a brand whose taste mixed apple, sugar, and regret. Jamie stuffed them in his rucksack under a hoodie. We met the girls on the red brick lane that slopes past fishmongers' sheds. The tide was ebbing, pulling seaweed flats into view. Gulls wheeled overhead, slow and lazy, like they too were waiting for the sky to switch colors. The harbor is shaped like a tilted horseshoe. You come down the brick road alongside stone walls that shelter the fleet from northerly storms, hang left across a low bridge of granite blocks, and step onto the peninsula where the lighthouse crouches. Beyond the lighthouse, bolts jut from timbers black with age. Few people bother to wander that far. From certain angles, the dock looks solid. Up close, you see gaps big enough to swallow a tourist's ankle. But we teenagers cared only that no adults patrolled there, and that the rocks beneath the gallery wall offered privacy if you ducked low. That evening, the Har rolled in as we reached the rocks. Har is our coast's coastal fog, a dense bank that forms when warm air drifts over cold North Sea water. It slides inland like a living thing, 1 minute invisible, the next minute matting hair against your cheek. The four of us settled on the rocks anyway, passing chip cartons, flicking salt packets open with teeth. Jamie cracked the first round of cider. He toasted, "Another year down," and aimed a wink at Una. I took the can Morag offered, and we clinked rims. We talked exam scores, summer jobs, which festivals we might afford. The har muffled our voices, turned every laugh into a small white cloud that drifted off and vanished. Around the time the sun sank into haze, conversations slipped into flirtation. Morag brushed an invisible fleck of salt from my sleeve. Una tugged a strand of hair behind Jamie's ear. Jamie offered to share his earphones. I dropped my voice when I told Morag her new necklace looked like something carved from sunrise. Small moves, each banking on the hush of fog to keep nerves steady. I remember thinking the night had settled into a perfect rhythm. The world narrowed to 4 beating pulses, cider sweetness, and the faint slap of waves against harbor stones. Then the smell rolled in. Fish, yes, but rotten fish. Fish left in sun until oil curdles. Fish blooming bacteria that claw the back of your throat. Fishing villages know fish stink, but the sourness felt heavier, almost oily. It was wrong for the hour. Boats were at sea. Tuesday night is the midway point of a working week, so nothing fresh should rot at quayside bins. Jamie wrinkled his nose. Una turned away. Morag coughed. We all tried to ignore the instinct that told us we had overstayed our welcome. Una pressed fingers to her lips. "I'm going to throw if we stay here," she whispered. Jamie offered to walk her home. He wanted her comfortable, maybe impressed by gentlemanly concern. I wanted Morag alone beside me, so I agreed easily. Jamie lifted his rucksack, squeezed my shoulder, half apology, half good luck, and followed Una back toward the bridge. Fog swallowed their shapes before they passed the lighthouse door. Silence settled, broken only by waves and the whir of lighthouse machinery. Morag tugged knees closer to her chest, pulling cardigan edges over goose-pimpled arms. I fought the urge to wrap my arm around her shoulders. We sat shoulder to shoulder. She leaned just enough for me to feel warmth through my sleeve. I remember her perfume smelled of heather and something spicy. We talked, soft, tentative, about plans after school, whether I would stay for 6th form, whether she might move to Edinburgh for art college. I felt so transparent I feared she could read the pound of my heart. She pressed her palm to my knee when a gust rattled the chipped papers at our feet. I wanted to freeze that moment like a photograph. A splash cut the air. Not a seagull dive, not a crab trap dropping, something heavier. My ears snapped toward the sound. Morag heard it too. We both scanned the water east of Dot, the lighthouse where the old dock jutted. The pier lay half hidden under fog. Maybe an otter paddled under the beams, I thought. Maybe a young seal chasing herring. The splash repeated, closer to the shore, larger. Something large had surfaced or was tossing against the pilings. I took a step up the broken path. Morag followed, curiosity outranking fear. We reached the edge, where the lighthouse's circular base meets quarried rock, and peered toward the jetty. Nothing moved, but the fog glowed faintly, lit from the harbor lamps behind us. Shapes drifted, foam flecks, bladder rack, bits of plank. I debated calling out in case a drunk tourist had fallen in. But the harbor water by the old dock is only waist deep at low tide. Anyone standing would show shoulders, no head bobbed. The splash came again, deeper clunk, accompanied by a long sucking hiss, like water sliding up wood. Morag hissed, "Look." Through the fog a shape rose onto the deck of the old dock. At first it seemed only a thick column, timber, maybe, hoisted by force of tide. Then the column unfolded elbows. A second later, a head emerged. I say head because something rested atop the shoulders, but it was not a human head. It tapered to a blunt point, wide at the jaw, narrowing like a wedge. The eyes sat low, close to where a mouth should be, but I never saw lips. The dorsal ridge, if you can call it that, swept backward where hair should sprout. The creature stood. No, it crouched, knees flexed wide like a man preparing to leap. Blade-thin arms dripped sheets of seawater. Its fingers or fins tapered into frayed webbing that fluttered as it balanced. Its torso gleamed brown-green, the color of bladderwrack slime, and bulbous nodules, sea bladders, peppered its shoulders. Scales or skin? I could not tell. The smell that had haunted us earlier returned, twice as thick, as if every fish head in the gutting shed had been liquefied and poured into our nostrils. It turned its face toward us. or toward some sound we could not hear. Where a mouth should be, a crease split open, long, vertical, exposing layered cartilage. The creature made a clicking sound, a series of rapid staccato snaps like pebbles tossed against glass. Then a hiss rolled out slow enough to frost breath. I yanked Morag backward. She resisted at first, unable to process the shape looming less than 15 meters away. Then she clutched my wrist so tight nails dug through fabric. We ran. Not toward the harbor lane, but inland along the seawall's top, boots hammering slippery algae, hearts thudding in stereo. The fog thickened. Behind us I heard water splash again, one enormous belly flop. The clicking resumed, echoed by a choked gurgle. I dared not glance back. We cleared the bridge, sprinted across cobbles of the main harbor basin, and bolted straight into the high street. A taxi idled near the pub. The driver leaned out to swear at us for startling him. We kept running until storefront lights and warm chip oil fumes replaced the smell of dead ocean. Only then did we dare slow. Morag leaned against an iron bollard and sobbed silently. I wrapped arms around her, still gripping cider cans, still hearing echo of clicking. We did not call police. What evidence could we offer? One old dock built to collapse, one patch of fog, one smell now drowned by diesel fumes. We found Jamie and Una sitting outside the bus shelter, confused and half-tipsy. We told them we saw something strange in the fog, an otter, a seal standing upright, and downplayed our racing pulses. Una laughed. Jamie squinted at me, trying to spot punchline. I kept quiet. At home I washed hands twice, convinced scales stuck under fingernails. Morag and I texted until dawn. You okay? What did we see? Should we tell anyone? We decided truth would brand us fools. We kept it secret. School resumed, exams returned. Jamie moved away, his dad landed work near Glasgow. An untethered summer ended. I thought secrets fade with time. They do not. They become ballast, heavy and silent, shaping every route you take. I avoid the lighthouse now. When the Har rolls in, I cross streets rather than pass fish crates. Cider tastes of rotten tide. Morag and I drifted. No fight, just space filling where laughter once lived. We still nod greetings, but every nod carries memory. Sometimes I stand on the newer quay during daylight, scanning the old dock's remains. Councillors argue yearly about tearing it down, but heritage groups protest. Timber rots further, green weed creeping. I watch waves slurp beneath those beams, and part of me expects a brown-green head to rise, blinking seawater from lifeless eyes. I hear my grand's bedtime stories of the Kalathnaku Sith, harborer of the abyss, the eel man who waits in shallows for curious souls. She warned us never to tread where warning boards stand, never to trust driftwood that seems alive, never to bend near the lip of piers when fog rolls in. Legends, I thought. Cautionary tales. Until the night legend stepped out and clicked my language in reverse. I keep telling myself one sighting proves nothing. We drank cider, fog distorts scale, fear magnifies shapes. Yet deep in my gut, something growls agreement with older truths whispered by fishermen mending nets at dawn. The sea keeps its secrets, but sometimes it sends them ashore to remind us who owns the dark water. I do not expect anyone to believe my account. Not the police, not teachers, not readers scanning lines years from now. But if you ever stand at the edge of a Scottish harbor at twilight and the wind dies and the smell of dead fish rolls in heavy enough to choke, listen. Do you hear clicking beneath the slop of waves? Does the fog hide something tall, hunched, dripping brine and staring with eyes as black as the gaps between stars? If you do, step back. Do not lean closer. Driftwood is safer left untouched. That is the only warning I can offer, paid for with whatever innocence I surrendered that night. The Kalathnaku Sith is no bedtime story. It waits where water laps rotted wood, and it hungers for anyone foolish enough to share a pier after sunset. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I am 24, and most of my waking hours go into woodworking jobs that I handle with my closest friend, James. We rent a metal-sided shop in a far corner of the eastern United States where paved roads fade into dirt, Power lines dip low between leaning poles, and thick forest presses in from three sides. On one flank, we have a broad clearing that once grew corn. Nobody harvests it now, so shoulder-high weeds and summer grass wave there until frost flattens everything. It is the kind of place where the night sky is heavy with stars, because town is too distant for street lamps to paint the clouds. Coyotes travel the tree line so often that we keep our scrap pile stacked high to discourage them from sniffing too close, and every evening we hear their calls bounce between the hills. After months of finishing cabinets and turning chair legs in that quiet, James and I thought we knew every animal that wandered near our lot. We were wrong. Late last Friday, we were still working long after most folks were home, eating leftovers and watching streaming shows. Orders had piled up. A motel in the next county wanted new headboards, and a local antiques dealer needed 6 tables repaired before a show. The plan was to push through until midnight, tidy the benches, and head home so we could catch half a Saturday of sleep. Around 11:30, the machines finally cooled. We swept shavings, oiled chisels, and tossed sawdust into the burn barrel. The only light left on was the yard lamp above the loading bay. Somewhere out in the dark, a lone coyote let out a flat, drawn-out cry. It sounded rougher than normal, but we barely noticed. In woodshop life, you become deaf to noises that are not motors or metal. By the time the wall clock flashed 12, James had closed the office door and killed the breakers. The interior fell silent, except for the click of our boots across concrete. I stepped outside first, keys in hand, pulling the heavy door shut. James came behind me, carrying his duffel. He had dropped his phone while crossing the gravel, and when he bent down to find it, the zipper on his jacket squealed loud. That is why both of us stopped talking long enough to hear the next sound. It rose from somewhere beyond the field, maybe halfway up the pine slope. Imagine a drunk man trying to sing through cracked lips while an angry cat hisses in rhythm. That is close to the pitch and rawness of the scream that washed over us. It did not sound like any coyote we had heard, nor a fox, nor an owl. It stretched so long that both of us felt our stomachs clutch. James lifted his face, eyes wide, mouth hanging half open. The night had gone bitterly quiet. Even insects seemed to pause. He asked what kind of animal could make that cry. I had no answer. I locked the door, hurried to the truck, told him we could discuss strange wildlife after we were halfway to town. Inside the cab, we waited 10 minutes, engine ticking as it cooled, windows cracked to feel the humid air. Nothing moved, nothing howled again. Finally, James gave me that sideways grin he wears whenever fear and thrill knot together in his chest. He said we were being silly, that we should go find out what kind of creature had wandered onto our turf. I argued with him, half serious, half laughing. He reminded me that steel doors, 4 wheels, and a spotlight gave us the safest vantage point any curious men could ask for. Against my better judgment, I opened the glove box, fished out the big LED torch, and rolled my window halfway. We drove across the grass, tires swapping gravel for soft dirt, the truck jostling so hard the coffee mugs rattled in the cup holders. The single path that splits the field climbs a gentle hill between walls of brush. Once we reached the slope, I flicked on the beam. It cut a bright cone upward, illuminating wild rye, ragweed stems, and the low branches of sweet gum trees. At the top of that rise, a good 300 yards ahead, I saw a shape standing on the trail. For a blink, I convinced myself it was a pale tree trunk, something bleached by weather and left at an odd angle. But trunks do not crouch. This thing was down on 4 limbs, elbows and knees jutting out at angular bends that looked too sharp for a deer. The spotlight reflected off eyes, wide, shining points locked onto us as if the creature had been waiting. Its body was the color of unvarnished pine, maybe darker and thinner than any wild dogs I have seen. Bones pressed under skin like knots under cloth. I could not see ribs rise and fall. It simply stared. Suddenly, with the speed of a whip crack, it vanished to the left. No swaying brush, no snapping twig came after. The beast's speed seemed impossible at that distance. My chest thudded. James muttered that it had to be a coyote. We repeated those words so we could swallow panic. Coyotes can look scrawny in summer. Coyotes' eyes reflect. Yes, we agreed. That must be what we saw. Still, James swung the wheel toward the spot where the creature had fled. We reached the crest, easing over ruts. On the far side, the meadow thickened. The plants climbed nearly to the hood. The truck crawled forward, engine idling low, my spotlight dancing over tangled gold stems. We heard rustling, a steady swish that matched our pace. Every few seconds it zipped ahead, as if something ran parallel inside the grass. It might have been a deer, we told each other. Might have been two coyotes chasing mice. Excuses kept our hands from shaking. Near the back edge of the second field, the path loops in an arc, so farm equipment can turn. That curve rises another 8 feet, granting a view across the entire clearing. James guided the truck into the bend. Headlights washed over weeds. That is when I saw it again, 100 feet away, no longer low to the ground, but risen onto 2 impossibly long legs. It was built like a human, stretched on a rack, skin draped tight, arms hanging far past the knees. The skull looked small for that height, yet it held those same glaring eyes that caught the beams and burned like hot metal. The creature seemed to calculate the distance. In the instant my breath froze, it folded at the waist, dropped forward and shot into the grass. 10 seconds later, the reeds on our right rippled wildly, and the thing burst across the path, limbs a tan blur, before diving into the narrow fringe of forest that borders the shop lot. Both of us yelled. James floored the gas, fish-tailed, tore mud, and aimed the truck downhill. My spotlight swept right and left. At the foot of the incline where the trail opens, I caught one last glimpse. The creature sprinted across the main field, covering what had to be 200 yards faster than any animal I have witnessed. It ran without sound, as though its feet barely touched earth. One leap carried it into shadow beneath an oak. It was gone. We did not slow until the shop's yard lamp shone behind us and loose boards rattled in the bed. No further screams followed. The only noise was the engine and our breathing. James turned onto the county road so fast the front tires squealed. 10 minutes later, we reached the highway. We talked over each other, how the thing moved, how tall it looked upright, how those eyes glowed like coins in water. By the time we split ways at the gas station, sunrise hinted on the horizon. I drove home, lay in bed, failed to sleep. Every time my eyes drifted closed, I felt those opaque eyes staring through the cab glass. Morning eventually pushed me back to the shop. Tools and lumber waited. James arrived an hour later, moving slower than usual. We walked the perimeter in daylight. No prints revealed themselves. The soil was too dry. One tuft of grass lay flattened near where we first saw it stand, but nothing conclusive. We checked the far trail loop together. Nothing but bent stems that could have been left by deer. Since that night, we have locked the door in early dusk, not midnight. The yard lamp now stays on until dawn. I ordered motion lights for the eaves. James bought extra memory cards for the trail cameras he keeps for hobby. We tell each other we will catch a glimpse again, prove it was just a starving canine. Still, each sunset that drags purple shadows over the field feels heavier than before. Work continues, but sometimes the plainer whine blends with the echo of that first scream, and my hand hovers over the stop switch. 3 nights have passed. I still see the creature's thin frame sinking on 4 limbs, that instant change from towering biped to low predator. I remind myself that forests hide many shapes at midnight. Yet part of me imagines that when the overhead light clicks off and wood dust settles, a pair of yellow eyes will be measuring the distance, waiting for the next time curiosity lures 2 tired woodworkers into its field. I was born and raised just outside